Good evening, directors, staff, and members of the public. I will now call the September 14th, 2021 regular business meeting to order. We will begin tonight by acknowledging that buildings within Minneapolis Public Schools are located within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. Minnesota comes from the Dakota name for this region, Minnesota Makoche, translating to the land where the waters reflect the skies, or cloudy waters. MPS recognizes the original peoples of this place and is committed to make ongoing efforts to educate the community about the relationship that Dakota people have to this area, both historically and today, as they remain here in their home. Thank you. As a reminder for anyone speaking tonight, including during public comment, please speak directly, clearly, and loudly into your microphone. For the benefit of all of us, but especially for our interpreters, for those using closed captions, and for those who normally rely on lip reading to help them understand, we really do need to project our voices to be heard through masks. And if you do briefly remove your mask to speak, please remember to put it back on properly after you've spoken. Finally, we do have one member, Director Ali, participating in today's meeting remotely by interactive technology. So pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.02, all votes today will be taken by roll call. Thank you. Clerk Polly, will you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Here.
Elamine.
Here.
Ali.
Here.
Cerrillo.
Here.
Inns. Here. Jordan.
Here.
Caprini.
Present.
Polly's here. Ellison.
Here.
Gebremeskel.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Next, we will approve our agenda for the evening. Director Arneson, will you please move approval of the agenda?
So moved.
May I please get a second?
Second. Greeny.
Thank you. Our agenda's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, Clerk Polly, will you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Aye.
Elamine.
Aye.
Ali.
Aye.
Cerrillo. Inns.
Aye.
Jordan.
Aye.
Caprini.
Aye.
Polly's yes. Ellison.
Yes, thank you. That motion carries. We have an approved agenda. Director Polly, will you please move approval of the minutes before us?
So moved.
May I please have a second?
Second.
Thank you. The minutes as presented for the August 10th, 2021 meeting have been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, Clerk Polly, will you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Aye.
Elamine.
Yes.
Ali.
Yes.
Cerrillo. Inns.
Aye.
Jordan.
Aye.
Caprini.
Aye.
Polly's yes. Ellison.
Aye, thank you. That motion carries and the August 10th minutes are approved. Our next item is public comments. Throughout the pandemic, while meeting virtually, we accepted comments by voicemail in advance. As we've now returned to in-person meeting, we will continue to offer the option submitting comments by voicemail, as well as resume the practice of hearing comments in person. First, we will hear from those comments submitted by voicemail. Staff, can you please play those comments?
Hi, my name is Jessica Johnson, and I'm an SEL TOSA at Lindale Community School. I want to express my gratitude for the keynote panel centering youth and family voice that was held at the district-wide August 25th professional development. I felt that it was extremely meaningful to have students and community members speak passionately to the district at large. Thank you.
Gary Marvin Davison, New Salem Educational Initiative, just a few blocks from the Davis Center, teaching the students whom you academically abuse during the daytime. Extended comments at newsalemeducation.blogspot.com. As you begin this new school year implementing your comprehensive district design, you admirably have driven the magnets to central locations, rationalized the transportation routes, and emphasized local community schools, but the education that will be delivered in those schools will be abysmal because the academic portion of the comprehensive district design is a jargon-infested piece of work that would logically be produced by people who have been ruined by those campus lowlifes known as education professors. You have no one at the Davis Center, very few among your teaching staff who have any academic heft, have any wherewithal to design an academic program that is knowledge intensive, logically sequenced, and delivers to our students the education that they should have. You are morally responsible for the deaths of children on the north side recently, because as long as we have these wretched public schools, cycles of poverty will continue at the urban core, and this situation will abide. You are responsible every day that your feet hit the ground for the abysmal education that is delivered by your lousy schools.
Hello, my name is Sarah Cooper Evans. I'm an MPS staff member and an MPS parent. I am calling in to thank the student and caregiver panelists who were part of our August professional development. Hearing their stories and truths of racism and unwelcome feelings in our schools feels absolutely necessary so that we change our practices and ways of being an MPS. I have been on teams and in meetings where we, and I am speaking as a white staff member and a white parent, go round and round talking about surveys and how to get input from students and families who are Black, Indigenous, people of color. Like, I can't even count the number of hours we have spent doing this. And you, students and caregivers, courageously and generously spoke your truth. Truth that before I had only heard in the safety of trusting relationships and friendships I personally have during conversations over tea or mom to mom on the sidelines of soccer fields. You know what I mean. I am listening, and as a MPS staff member and a fellow MPS parent. Now, when I stop to think about how to show up as a white parent or a white staff in our district, it's your voices and your stories I am hearing. I honor your generosity in sharing them. So I am calling to support MPS continuing to create structures and policies that center youth and caregiver voices, specifically the voices of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the voices of students and caregivers who are disabled, and all groups who have not had privilege before in MPS. With your voices, we can make decisions and create new anti-racist structures and ways of being an MPS. We need to do this work, and
Yes, hello. My name is Lars Negsted. I'm the father of a 4th grader at Seward Montessori and a 7th grader at Sanford Middle School. I'm calling to voice my support for the resolution to require that all MPS staff be vaccinated against COVID. Our whole family is vaccinated except for our 4th grader, who is not yet eligible. After all the turmoil of the past 18 months of distance learning and the district redesign process, I feel this is a common sense step you can take to protect the public health of our kids in our community. So please support the resolution and vaccinate all staff. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nell Curry. I am both a teacher in MPS as well as a parent in MPS. And I am calling to leave a comment just regarding the panel of families and students of color that we had when we were the days back to school, our PD days back, and how powerful I thought that was. I know that those can be, hearing the raw truth as teachers, especially as white teachers, can sometimes be hard to swallow, but I just wanted to call and share that I think that is the direction we need to go with our professional development for staff in the district, is having more more time and more opportunities to really hear from the families and the students that we serve in the district, because we do have such a white-centric view on education. Our system in general is built in white supremacy culture, and I think that we are not afforded a lot of opportunities, especially for teachers who are teaching in schools in areas that don't have a lot of students of color, are really just not exposed to a lot of the honest truths about what our families and students experience as being people of color in a large district with so many white educators surrounding them. So I just hope that wanted to make sure that my voice was heard, that it was important, it was powerful, and I hope to see and hear more professional development for our teachers around equity and race conversations with families. Thank you.
Good day, school board. This is Jen Antela, and I'm a community member in Minneapolis, and I teach after school in various schools throughout the district. I'd like to call your attention to ensuring that teachers that are using racist language or treating students differently based on skin color be removed from the district. It's very important that our young minds are treated with equity and with fairness by everyone in the district that's employed, including teachers, including staff, including board, including district, including everyone. And unfortunately, we see cases where that isn't happening. Just really want to emphasize that our young students need that support from you, need that support from the board, and please do develop policies and implement those policies that ensure that our students are not in front of racist teachers or staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from those who signed up to provide comment with us here tonight. As staff projects the speaker list and our first speaker comes to the podium, I'll remind all of us of the public comment guidelines. Comments should be no more than 2 minutes each and must not mention identifiable information about individual staff or students, and must not include profanity, insults, threats. And finally, since it's been a while, remember that this is an opportunity for us to hear from the community, but we will not respond in the moment to comments or questions. Elijah Norris Holiday. Excuse me.
Board of Directors, Superintendent Graf, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm just going to get right into it because I only have 2 minutes and I really want to get through everything I have to say. We're 107 days away from the end of the school year. Currently 67 homicides into the year. Primarily young black youth and young adults make up those 67 lives that are no longer with us. We're on track to break a record, but not one worth celebrating nor one worth glorifying. We've had countless press releases, public events where politicians and others alike have assembled to shake hands. We have taken the pictures, we have heard the screams and cries of too many families grieving the loss of their loved ones, the senseless gun violence. Yet we have not responded to this chaos, nor have we taken the time to address these homicides and violence head on. We're in the middle of a war, and the casualties of this war are people that look like me. And I take this matter very seriously. You may wonder why I bring up homicides in a school board meeting. For some of you, the issue is unrelated. However, I beg to differ. This war is not only taking place throughout our community, but inside this institution that says they're committed to supporting student growth into knowledgeable, skilled, and confident citizens capable of succeeding in their work, personal, family, and community lives into the 21st century. Well, we are now entering the 22nd year of the 21st century, and it seems that we're more than centuries away from accomplishing that mission. Addressing education disparities is essential if we want to change the current realities we are dealing with in Minneapolis. Those realities are that nearly 77% of black and brown students attending MPS cannot read, write, or do math proficiently. Let me put this into perspective. 77 out of every 100 black and brown students cannot read, write, or do math after graduating from MPS. And the most recent article released on proficiency rates states that according to the district statistics, 23% or fewer than 1 in 4 students of color were proficient in math, while 3 out of 4 white children met the basic standards indicating math proficiency. Even more astounding, only 28% of students of color were proficient in reading. Nearly 79% of white students were reading at the expected grade level. This is the results of the 2018-2019 data released by you all. We have yet to see the statistics for last year. For those who believe the failures in the classroom are unrelated to the violence we experienced from our youth, I ask you to ponder what happens to a student that leaves MPS that cannot read, write, or do simple math. What happens to a student that leaves MPS and does not feel valued, wanted, or supported in an MPS school system? I'll tell you what I know. Those students get lost to the streets, and once lost to the streets, violence becomes a part of their life, and so does death and self-destruction. No longer can MPS work in silos that continue to fail our black students. Instead, we need to encourage collaboration between MPS and community organizations to offer additional tutoring services, after-school programming that promotes professional and personal development, mental health support, and offer an environment where students feel empowered and uplifted, not failed and hopeless. It is not my intention tonight to throw the education system under the bus or to blame any of you for the destruction we're noticing in our community. I do not want you all to see me as making adversaries of you all. Instead, this is an opportunity for you all to collaborate with the community and actually address these disparities head on. Admitting these failures is tough, and I know it's difficult for you all to digest. But in order for us to really create the change we want to see in our communities, we must address these proficiencies head on and these failures head on, not continue to ignore them. My name is Elijah Norris Holiday, and I thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Kulia Pringle.
Good evening, board members, Chair Ellison, Superintendent Graf. My name is Kulia Pringle. I'm the Midwest Regional Coordinator for the National Parents Union, and I'm here to speak on a few different items today. E is supposed to be testifying, a former MPS student. They're not able to make it tonight because they are sick, but I was here to support her in her effort to have MPS fire your racist teachers. E had a racial encounter, a racial incident with a teacher, and there has been no accountability for that teacher. That teacher is currently being placed, and we don't know what harm or what black child that teacher is going to be placed in front of. My next issue, the main reason why I'm here is to have MPS take academic outcomes for black children, indigenous children, Latinx children very seriously. You have not came up with the evidence-based literacy plan yet. I've spoken to your senior officers, both Dr. Faring and Senior Officer Moore, and I'm still confused. I've looked at the ESSER plans and the dollars where the money's going to be spent. I'm still confused. Parents are confused, the students are confused, everybody's confused. We don't know what MPS's priorities are when it comes to this funding. The community engagement, I was placed on the list, but when I checked with other stakeholders on that list, a lot of them didn't know that they were on the list. Many of them didn't reach out to families. When I reached out to families to find out if they knew what ESSER even was, they had no clue what ESSER was. They didn't know that there was a place where they could submit their recommendations on the website. I don't have a problem with educating families because that's part of my job, but I feel like MPS has a bigger reach when it comes to the families in MPS. I can't reach every family in Minneapolis Public Schools to make sure that they have the knowledge needed in order to advocate for their children effectively. So I'm here to say that today, I'm officially launching a school board accountability watch as far as those ESSER dollars is concerned. I will be engaging the community very, you all know, I always engage the community, but the community is I'm gonna make it my business to make sure that families and students are educated about the funds that are being spent or not being spent, and what MPS claims is a priority or not a priority when it comes to academic outcomes, social emotional learning, and basically academic outcomes. That's the basic one. When we talk about the disparities and we talk about kids on North Side getting killed, poverty breeds death. And when kids can't read, you're almost guaranteed either to die, live a lifestyle of poverty, or end up in prison. Thank you.
Thank you. E, let's see. She's not coming, okay. Jarrell Perry.
Good evening, board members. My name is Jarrell Perry. I'm here representing my children who attend Minneapolis Public Schools. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for everybody being here tonight, being concerned about what's going on as far as our children's future. There's a couple things that I wanted to touch on, but my first thing is Stable Home, Stable Schools. It's an extraordinary program partnership between Minneapolis Public Schools, Minneapolis Public Housing, and Hennepin County. It only serves 18 of our 100 Minneapolis Public Schools. So I'm asking you all to do what you can to advocate that all 100 schools be included in that going forward. Not only should all 100 schools be included in Stable Home, Stable Schools, all students in the city of Minneapolis should be included in that. That includes students that attend charter schools, private schools, and home schools. So we have so many of our children's futures that are in your hands, so I'm asking that you all do what you can do to advocate for that. Another thing that I wanted to address is the literacy rates. There's no acknowledgement of the current state of literacy in the district. Example, half of students not reading at grade level, and some of the worst achievement gaps in the United States. The district presented a slide that claimed to explain we are and where we're going, yet completely left out the district's current realities for student literacy. Similarly, the framework does not mention what MPS is presently doing to improve literacy instruction, interventions, and outcomes. There's no analysis of current practices and curriculum, core instructions, or interventions without an authentic and thorough analysis of what we're doing now. There's no way to form a plan to improve going forward if we don't know where we're currently standing. The presentation focused on almost exclusively on the value statements. There was no detail on how MPS plans to implement or measure them. Dr. Goldie Muhammad's book, Cultivating Genius, which seems to form the foundations of the district's materials, enumerates 4 necessary components of equitable literacy instructions. Those 4 things include literacy instruction, identity development, skills development, intellectual development, and criticality. The MPS presentation said nothing about skills development. There was exactly 1 bullet in the elementary presentation that mentioned actual skills and knowledge to be developed, word recognition, language comprehension, and strategic knowledge, but nothing in the presentation concretely explained how students would go about building them. The framework lays out vague goals, including this one: find liberation and agency as fluent readers, writers, and speakers. While the goal is lofty, the framework offers no specific actions or timelines to indicate how this or any other goal for students will be reached. If it weren't for the Minnesota law that requires all districts to report their efforts to identify students with characteristics of dyslexia, there would have been no discussion of the importance of explicit systematic literacy instruction, especially in elementary school, where our children's development is most important to guide how they're going to live their lives. There was a tiny nod to the teacher professional development to help teachers recognize characteristics of children with dyslexia, but no discussion of proven programs to help them learn to read. There was no talk of assessment. There was no discussion about what the success or accountability should look like in this framework. In fact, there were no metrics whatsoever in this framework. While MPS keeps on creating the meaningless framework, BIPOC children and BIPOC communities will continue to suffer because there is no plan. So again, I'm asking you all to do what you can. The lives of our children and their livelihoods depend on what you decide to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Tanya, John.
Coming up as a team today, sorry. So I'm going to speak for just a moment, and then we're going to also let my colleagues speak as well. Good evening, board members and Superintendent Graf. My name is Tanya Drew. I'm a parent, an organizer, and a member of the National Parent Union. And I just want to say a couple of things. I would like MPS to make sure there's a process for dealing with racist teachers. We know for parents and students that have recognized them, instead of allowing them to switch from school to school to school to do more harm, to do more hurt for the teachers or the students that they affect the most, we need to have a process to either get them out or get them away from teachers or students and things like that. I'd also like MPS to take literacy seriously and to do a bold action step. There's no longer time to wait and allow our children not to be able to read. We can no longer sit back and just wait for literacy plans to come to fruition and wait for results. We need to take bold actions on them now. The last thing I would like to say is I would like to make sure that the money that's coming into MPS is transparent and accountable to the families. And I just want to let you know, I teach families how to hold people accountable. And they're making sure that we're watching what people do because this is our future. We want to make sure that the money that you guys are getting is going to be invested in us because we want that educational system to work for just not those that have money already, but for everybody. So we want to make sure that you know we are watching. We will hold people accountable to make sure that that money is spent wisely. And we are encouraging you to be bold and transparent while you're spending that money to make sure that you take us into the future and be the district that other people look at for bold and actionable steps. I'm going to give it to John Thompson.
My name is John Thompson. I am a Minnesota State Representative. I'll be real quick. It's been a while since I've seen you guys, but when black people come here and tell you what we need, believe us. We've been black all our lives. There is a kid at one of your schools today, and he may show up tomorrow, who witnessed his brother's brains get blown out. There's a kid that may show up to your school today or tomorrow whose older brother may have went to prison for carjacking somebody here on the north side of Minneapolis. There's a brother or a sister right now crying for your help. And so if you're telling me that we can get culturally intelligent mental health providers and get them support in these schools, then you're in the wrong business. When black people tell you what we need, support us. Stand up? Oh, she wouldn't let me stand up. But I'm just sharing time because Tanya's not here. So we just want to make sure that you understand when we say what we need in our community, believe us. That's it. I thank you guys, and I always end by saying this. There's enough hate in the world. I love each and every one of you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Toya Woodland. Not here. Okay. Heather Anderson.
Good evening. It's so weird to be here back in person. I really missed driving over here and practicing on the way over what I was going to say. So I just wanted to talk about transportation tonight. I know that that's a topic that you have all heard about this week. I understand that we are living within a system of shortages and that we don't have easy choices to make. But with that ask, I would ask that our district prioritize the magnet schools and their offerings and transportation to magnet schools. I would also ask, I would just say that we did the bold and brave thing with the CDD of making sure that those amazing opportunities were inside of our magnet schools so that students of color would have access to those. And so those programs are there, but it doesn't do any good for us to have STEM at Hall if they can't get buses for their kids to get home. So we need to make sure that that happens. I would also like us to prioritize special education students. A lot of those students spent the last 18 months not receiving any in-person services, and they need to be able to be seen. And then finally, I'd like us to prioritize students in racially isolated schools. And I would like us to make sure that those are the students that get to school. I've been doing some research in the last day, which it's very important as a public speaker that I do research. But I do want to say, it seems as though there's some sort of route bidding process that bus drivers go through in order to get routes. And it seems like that has some racist implications because it feels as though, or anecdotally, I've been able to say Southwest school buses generally seem to be showing up more. So I would like us to think about if we could prioritize the bidding processes so that we could do equitably for students. And like if there's going to be not enough, then maybe the white racially segregated schools who chose that need to go without a bus for a little while. And then I'd also like us to focus on continuing to implement the CDD. Even though we're going through a pandemic, I recognize that we have more hurdles, more things to overcome. But I'll just say my children are at Jefferson Global Studies Magnet School this year, and they wouldn't be there if we'd held off on the CDD and waited because of the pandemic last year. And they're having an amazing experience. So let's continue to do the work of the CDD. Let's continue to do the work of the climate and framework and culture. Let's continue to do the work of the board's agenda for this year, even though we have so much else to take care of. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Karen Willis. I am the SCA at Marcy School of the Arts. It has changed. I was asked to speak to the school board tonight with my concerns for the school year. One of my major concerns is my school has gone from a K-8 to a K-5. Therefore, none of our students are vaccinated. I don't know about the ratio of adults, but I do know that as adults who may be vaccinated, we can pass the virus on to our students. I personally am doing everything I can not to. Our students are having a hard time keeping masks on and practicing social distancing and keeping their hands off their faces and touching everything because they are students. Okay, that's my major concern, is that one of our students is going to get ill. Okay. I don't know how I can, prevent this. I just know that my son has done everything he could not to bring the virus home to his son, and he did. His 9-year-old son got COVID. He and his wife tested negative, but his son tested positive, and no one on his football team tested positive. Only him. Fortunately, it was a mild case, and after 2 months, he still has a cough. Okay, so this scares me. That one. Another thing that is very concerning for me for the school year is that our buses, like I said, I am a bus aide in special ed, and the fact that I've not had the same driver, was today the 5th day of school, I've only had the same driver morning or afternoon 3 times, is scaring me, because we need continuity with our students. Okay, I had at most 3 students. Marcy is southeast, I live north. School is out at 4 o'clock. I should get home before 5. I have not, and that's half the kids on my bus. We have to do something to fix this. I don't know how, but this is not safe. There's no snow on the ground, and only half my kids have ridden the bus. What are we going to do when there's snow on the ground? This is not safe, and right now, we have no weather impeding us. Okay, these 2 of my major concerns
Thank you.
right now.
Thank you very much. Sarah Spafford Freeman.
Weird to see you all in person, but I'm happy to be here in person. Thank you. First, I want to just be here to support ETHES and their demand for dignity in MPS classrooms and accountability for teachers who don't grant that dignity in MPS classrooms. I have had the pleasure of meeting E, and if that is a young person we aren't serving in our classrooms, then we got to seriously consider what we're doing in our classrooms. The other thing I want to talk to you about is literacy and the ESSER dollars that the district is going to be discussing tonight and voting on soon. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for this district to invest in students and classrooms and teachers. Our educators are the biggest line item on the MPS balance sheet, but we're not investing in them in this plan. I see a lot of pilot programs, and I think in our rush to spend and assign these dollars in time for state and federal deadlines, that we're not being thoughtful about what the strategy for spending this once-in-a-generation money should be and who we're ultimately seeking to serve. We have a district where half of the students don't read at grade level. Half of Black students are 2 grade levels or more behind. And the learning disruption of the last 3 years has been intense. Those chickens are all coming home to roost in classrooms this fall, and you have an opportunity, and in your roles, you have an obligation to meet those students where they are, serve them with dignity, invest in our educators, promote the science of reading and training in it, invest in a culturally relevant and rigorous curriculum that ensures that elementary students form the foundational skills they're going to need for the rest of their education and the rest of their lives. I implore you to pump the brakes on the 4 pages of line items that are being presented to you tonight, and instead have a discussion about what the priorities the district has are, what the values this district has are, because these budgets are value statements. And I've looked at the one the district is discussing tonight, and I don't know what the priorities are, and I don't know what the values are. Please, I implore you, this is so important. Do it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean?
Good evening, Chair, Superintendent, members of the board. My name is Sean Layton. I'm a resident of the Whittier neighborhood. I'm currently serving as the president of our ESP union. Every year, our group starts with significant vacancies, reflecting the low wages paid, like most things, to our members. Like most things, the pandemic has simply made this worse. I'd like to call your attention to the following vacancies in our ESP bargaining group and ask that you consider how new state dollars will be spent to fill these vacancies and fix chronically low wages for non-licensed educators and MPS. Our work is essential to the functioning of our schools. In short, we make school happen. It's hard to make school happen with so many vacancies. Anderson has 5, Anthony has 1, Armitage has 4, the Avid Pool has multiple openings, Bancroft has 1, Barton has 1, Bethune has 2 openings, Bilingual CTE has an opening, Bryn Mawr has 3 openings, Burroughs has an opening, multiple openings in the SEA cadre. The CCA pool has multiple openings, City View has 2 openings, Culinary and Wellness has an opening, Deaf and Hard of Hearing has 4 openings, Dowling has an opening, Early Childhood has 4 openings, ECSC pool is open, Edison has 3, Fair has 3, Falwell has 2, Franklin has an opening, Green has 2, Hall has 4, Harrison has 2, Henry has 5, HIA has 2, High 5 has an opening, Howe has an opening, Indian Education has an opening, Jefferson has 4 openings, Keewaydin has 3 openings, Kenny has 3 openings, Kenwood has 3, Laney has an opening, Loring has an opening, Lindale has 3, Marcy has 1, Metro has 1, Northeast Middle has 4, North High has 5, Northrop has 2, Nellie Stone Johnson has an opening, Olson has 5 openings, Online Academy has 2 openings, Page has 4, Pillsbury has 4, Pratt has 2, the Riverbend Pool has multiple openings, Roosevelt has 3 openings, Sanford has 5, Sheridan has 3, South High School has 6 openings, Sped Level 3 has an opening, Sullivan has 3 openings, Southwest High School has an opening, T Plus has multiple openings in its pool and a posted position, Teen Parenting Services has an opening, Washburn has 4, Webster has 2, Wellstone has 1, and Wyndham has 2. We have historically high openings in our ESP group, and this is a normal thing at the beginning of the year, usually over 100. We have over 153 openings right now that are just posted for internal employees to look at. This is a problem, but it reflects a long emergency that has been going on in our district for too long. We need to do better by our hourly workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone okay? Okay, all right. So next I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Graf to provide any opening comments and then any reports and recommendations, including a presentation on the American Rescue Plan funding, an item on which we will be voting on later tonight. Superintendent Graf, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Ellison, Board Director, Student Representative Gabra Meskel. Good evening. Members of the public here tonight, thank you as well. As already mentioned, tomorrow marks the 6th day of school in Minneapolis Public Schools. And prior to the start of the school year, I participated in multiple professional development sessions, and the message was consistent for everyone I spoke to. Get excited. Certainly this is a well-anticipated start to the school year, first time that our students would be in person on the first day of school in September in over 2 years. And we know that this means a lot, being able to interact with their peers, participate in their school communities in person. I'm happy to report that my anticipation was realized in many of the school visits that I've had over the last 6 days and follow-up conversations with staff and principals across the district at various grade levels. The common theme of, even amidst all of our challenges, was excitement. Of course, we have our normal anticipation of the start of the school year, but the excitement of being in person is definitely there, even behind those masks. Our commitment to help each one of our students maintain that first day of excitement until the very last day is something that we want to continue with. And I again won't shy away from the fact that this past week, the first week, has been difficult and brought us some significant challenges. Two of the most that have been impacting families are around those that you heard tonight, the transportation and our staffing. As we've shared with the community since well before the school year started, every day Minneapolis Public Schools has approximately 2/3 of the drivers we need to cover the routes that transport more than 22,000 students to and from school each day. And this has clearly created hardships for families as well as our school staff. And we are attempting to address the shortages in a variety of ways, but we recognize for frustrated families that that obviously isn't enough. What I can tell you is that we are working hard to continue to recruit more drivers. This is something that, again, has been going on for a long period of time, and I know that it's something that will continue to happen as long as we have this challenge and this need for our district and for our students. Excuse me just a minute, I lost my notes here. We have been participating in many community events and visiting community centers, churches, mosques, promoting the recruitment and retention bonuses that we've worked with our Teamster bargaining group to implement. We are continuing to recruit and train and hire new drivers, which is a 3-month process, so it does take us some time. We've also offered stipends to families who can carpool or transport their children to school, but the situation does change daily for us. For example, to note, yesterday we had 19 routes that we were able to plan for and cover with second run attendance or second run buses. But we also had an additional 21 last minute cancellations from our contractors and our own drivers, over which we had no forewarning. So the control we do have is consideration of which students, schools, and communities are impacted when, and if we make system or schedule changes to address this issue. So those are the things that we're looking at. In those instances, we absolutely consider free and reduced lunch status and any other issues that could affect driving at an equitable solution. As we do every year, we have also heard from families who have seen their child's class roster and are concerned about the class size. And that was the other area that was touched upon this evening. I want to again reiterate that the rosters are compiled before the school year starts. We are in our 6th day of school, and in these first few weeks, we go through a process to determine which children are actually showing up to those classes. This always creates a level of anxiety, which we know is exacerbated this year because of COVID and the social distancing concerns. Our approach to addressing this is to encourage positive daily attendance, making sure that we have phone calls to families, we're verifying our enrollment numbers, and are making those staff adjustments as necessary. We also hope to provide a more accurate picture later this month around what the enrollment looks like for our schools. And in my email to staff last week, I did conclude by saying that this would be a consequential board meeting tonight. And you'll, as board directors, will be asked to consider several important items that are going to influence the learning environment in our schools for both the short and long term. Tonight, we are asking the board to consider a resolution that would require all employees and those contractors, volunteers, and partners with direct student contact be vaccinated against COVID-19 or submit to regular testing. And I will say a little bit more about this in the, later in the meeting, but I know it can be a polarizing issue, and I commend the board for agreeing to consider this issue as we look to keep our students and staff as protected as we can from COVID-19 and its variants. Also, tonight, we have the topic of school names. And last year, after hearing the passionate advocacy from dozens of students and community leaders, including former student representative Ahmed, the school board formed a community advisory committee to research and make recommendations on any MPS school names that should be changed on account of the words and or actions of their namesake. And this committee has completed their work, which includes recommending a set of district level efforts, including additional research, educational opportunities for students about names, and the creation of a central fund to support name changes. And while the committee is only making recommendations and the board action would need to advance any of their suggestions, I believe the entire process represents our commitment to not only hearing student voice, but to acting on that feedback consistent with our district values. And I look forward to hearing Student Representative Gebra Meskel's comments on this topic. And then finally, I'm pleased to be presenting our SR3 funding plan to the board this evening. The recommendations you will see this evening represent a strategic approach to addressing the significant impact of COVID-19 learning disruptions on our students. Our plan was shaped largely in part by the feedback we received from our American Rescue Plan Community Advisory Committee, many of whom went above and beyond to gather input and ideas from their own networks. And I want to thank the members of the committee for their dedication to our students and for their willingness to serve as community connectors and for meeting with us in 4 separate meetings over the course of the spring and summer. We also received input through the Tribal Network consultation with the Tribal Nations Education Committee, as well as through input via online, the online submission form on our website, and from individuals and organizations that reached out directly to me or members of my team. And as always the case, when I see the eagerness of our partners and community members to engage and share ideas, I'm reminded again and incredibly grateful that despite the challenges of the past year and a half, there is no shortage of dedication to the success of our students among the residents of Minneapolis. And as you review the recommendations this evening, it's important to note that there is a close alignment with the long-term vision for our district. And this alignment does reflect the priorities of the board and the goals of the comprehensive district design, all of which again are wrapped into the goals and priorities within our community. I would also like to highlight the underlying design principles that guided our work in the process. It was equity, transparency, and accountability. We recognized early on that these principles would not only provide a useful lens for us to vet ideas, but they were foundational to ensuring that the investments we made were responsible, sustainable, and impactful. And a few points to illustrate these foundational principles to keep in mind as you listen to the presentation this evening. First, the ESSER3 funds are time limited rather than ongoing and permanent. That means that while we receive suggestions about staffing increases and class size reduction that deserve ongoing consideration, using these one-time funding sources is not the most practical way to fund those types of needs. We vetted recommendations in part through the lens of how to maximize the funds without incurring ongoing costs that can't be sustained once the grant comes to an end. We made predicated decisions on the assumption of maintaining current staffing levels and program structures. And the best way for us to get the most impact from these funds is to amplify what we know works. Our planning conversations have also reflected our responsibility to evaluate and hold ourselves accountable for how the funds are utilized and the impact they've had. And you'll see we've added specific recommendations for accountability and transparency to make it easy for the public to keep track of how these funds are used and whether they are meeting their intended outcomes. And then finally, and I think it's one of the most important pieces to note, we wanted to make sure that we go above and beyond the provisions in ESSER3 that specifically require us to set aside at least 20% of the funding to address learning loss, and that pay special attention to the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on underrepresented student groups. And you'll see in our plan that we go well beyond that, investing nearly 29% of the total ESSER3 funds to academic interventions and strategies designed directly to mitigate the negative impacts of COVID-related disruptions on our students. And in a moment, I'll ask Executive Director of Finance, Brian Hull, to walk through both the process we used to synthesize the feedback we received, as well as to develop the plan itself. And I again want to thank all the members of my team who spent countless hours in a relatively compressed period of time to develop this plan, especially our finance, communications, and community engagement team for their work. As always, this is not the work of one person. It's an entire team of people who've dedicated their careers to making a difference for our students. And certainly the SR3 work doesn't end this evening. Rather, it transitions in the coming weeks and months as we move from planning to submitting our plan and our application to the state and then implementation. And I am confident that the work we've done will continue and will continue to do with these substantial new funds will have a significant impact on our efforts to help every student recover, thrive, and succeed from this pandemic. So with that, I'll ask Executive Director Hull to come forward and certainly look to have him begin the presentation of our SR3 process and our proposal that we have for the board to consider this evening.
There we go. Is that better? A little bit? As you know, this has been an extensive planning process steeped in community engagement, and we are excited to share the fruits of that labor with you all here tonight. So first, an overview of this process. These funding recommendations really aim to address the serious impacts of COVID-19 on the students of Minneapolis Public Schools. They align with the community-driven, long-term vision for our district, grounded in equity, transparency, and accountability. These recommendations were informed by thoughtful feedback received from Minneapolis parents, partners, and community members. This slide shows, as the superintendent mentioned a few moments ago, a list of the members of the advisory committee that we have been engaging with since, I believe, May. They've played a great role in providing feedback as we've worked through this process. In addition to this particular group, we have engaged with many of the groups listed here on a one-to-one basis as well. So some of these slides you've seen before, others may be new to you. This one really just kind of highlights, as the superintendent mentioned a few moments ago, the key tenets, the guiding principles that we have relied on throughout this process, those being equity and engagement. So we know that the pandemic has had a disruptive impact on all of our students. We also know that that impact has not been equal, and that some of our most fragile students have been the ones that are the most impacted. And we've also wanted to make sure that throughout the process, at every step, we're engaging our students, our families, and our community members. So the commitments that we made up front is a commitment, one, to equity, targeting these funds so that the students who are most impacted also benefit from these funds. A commitment to lifting up the voices of our families, our students, partners, and our community members. And finally, a commitment to transparency and accountability, both for decision making and for the efficacy of the investments that we make. So as we've mentioned, there has been extensive community engagement throughout this process. So what did we hear from the community? Most of the suggestions that we received fell into kind of 6 large priority buckets, those being the social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students, academic programs to address learning disruption, safe and healthy buildings and facilities, expectations for transparency and accountability, equitable high-quality talent acquisition and maintenance, and finally, community collaboration and partnerships. So most of the, if not all of the recommendations that you'll see in this presentation fall within one of these 6 priority categories. So how did MPS go about engaging the community? There was a multi-pronged approach, as the superintendent mentioned. The ESSER Stakeholder Advisory Committee, which we just looked at the members of that committee, played an instrumental role, but that was not the only engagement we did. We also did extensive outreach through digital communications, email blasts, and website, tribal consultations, as was mentioned, and then direct community input, receiving dozens of direct emails from community members. So that was really the guiding principles, helped establish the guiding principles for our work. There are also additional areas that we had to take into consideration, or that we wanted to take into consideration. Number one, of course, being the MPS board values, making sure that all of these investments are aligned with the direction and the course that you all have set for the district. The comprehensive district design, making sure that these funds are amplifying and accelerating that work. Of course, because these are federal dollars, the federal guidance that comes along with that, written into the law, and then additional priorities set forth by the Minnesota Department of Education. So after spending several months gathering all of this input, Superintendent Graf and his team did an excellent job of prioritizing, really coming up with an extensive list, which went well above and beyond the amount of money that was available, and then prioritizing those potential investments based on the needs of our students and our families as it relates to COVID-19, and then again, and importantly, the alignment with the existing strategic direction of the district. So the next 6 slides are broken out by these 6 priority buckets that you probably are all familiar with at this point. They include academics, mental and emotional health of our students, safe and healthy buildings, high-quality staff, community partnerships, and an expectation for transparency and accountability. And then below are lists of, are some examples of the recommendations for SR3 investments. So the first one here, and this is one of our largest, the academic programmings to address learning loss. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but a few of the highlights include expanding summer and break programming, reading interventions, additional pre-K programming, universal access to technology, and increased tutoring and during the day and after school programs. So as the superintendent mentioned, one of the stipulations written into the law is that every district must spend at least 20% of the money to address learning loss, and we have gone well above and beyond that. Our investment, as proposed here, will be closer to 30% of the overall funding for SR3. The next large priority bucket was social, emotional, and mental health. We all know the toll that the past 2 years have taken on all of us, particularly our young learners. So some of the recommendations that we're putting forth to address these needs include additional school psychologists and social workers, student support groups, and investments in restorative practices. Next is safe and healthy buildings and facilities. So to make sure that we're addressing this, we're maintaining and expanding our custodial staff. We continue to replace air handling systems and make upgrades there, and then continued ventilation, personal protective equipment, and disinfecting supplies. equitable, high-quality leaders and staff. We all know how important this is. So some of the areas that we're targeting with these dollars include expanding high school to teaching pathways, including summer internships, investing in the design and implementation of the MPS internal licensure program, and funding additional human resources consultants to support with recruitment. And again, I'm not reading all of them. These are just some of the highlights. The next slide has community collaboration and partnerships. So to address this, we're recommending investments in bilingual and bicultural community outreach navigators and the expansion of parent participatory evaluation programs and community navigators, among other investments that you see on the screen here. Next, and we heard this through a lot of our community engagement, and we heard it here tonight again, is an expectation for transparency and accountability. So this includes both the process and how we're making these decisions, but also how they're being implemented and the efficacy of the programs that we're investing in. So to make sure that we are evaluating that, one of the recommendations is to add additional staff under Senior Officer Moore to report the results and the impacts of these ESSER3 investments. We also are working with IT right now to develop a dashboard that will show the budgets and the spending for these dollars in near real time so that board members and community members can stay apprised as to exactly where we stand as we work through the next 3 years. So those are the 6 large buckets. We're, in addition, making a large investment in sustainability for our students and predictability for our families. So we know that the power of any of these new investments could be undercut or offset by significant program reductions or increases in class size. Making new investments without continuing existing services could negatively impact students and schools and compromise the quality education that families expect for their children. So we really want to continue investing in the things that we believe are working while using these funds to accelerate and enhance what we're able to offer our students through additional programming. And so we're recommending that some of the ESSER3 funds be used to retain or maintain staffing levels at our school sites, dependent on enrollment. And so what does that look like? It's kind of a nebulous concept, but these are just some examples of what some of these investments could be as far as maintaining the staffing and the programming that's currently in place. So making sure that we continue to invest to maintain the class sizes that we have now. As we lose students from our system, that becomes more expensive, but really wanting to make sure that we're targeting that as a priority. And then there are several other investments here, including in our English language learner teachers, our SEAs, and our school-based differentiation specialists, and then additional investments. Again, not an exhaustive list here. So this is a slide, just kind of a reminder that what we're talking about now is ESSER3, which is the third large bucket of federal funds we've received over the past 18 months. The first one was part of the CARES Act. That was mainly, almost entirely expended in this past school year in immediate response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the transition to virtual learning. We continued with some of this over the summer, doing summer school and providing additional opportunities for our students. But the point being is that this money was mainly used in the past school year to address COVID as it overtook our country and the world. The next one shows the ESSER2 investments. So these are the investments that are budgeted and will be expended in this current year. And so these are things that we are talking about for this current summer and for the upcoming, or now the current school year. And they include additional summer and after-school programming, supports for our EL students and our students with special needs, mental health supports, ventilation, PPE, etc. So these are the funds that will be mainly budgeted and expended in the current school year, leaving the ESSER 3 funds, a large chunk of those, for next year and the following year. So this is the remainder of our timeline. When we started this presentation 6 months ago, it was much longer. We're down to, after tonight, one main deadline, at least in the near term, and that is a submission of the grant application to MDE on October 1st. So with that, I will pause and see if there are questions.
Thank you. Please check. Directors, if you want to press your button on your box, the request to speak. I know it's been a while. And Director Ali, if you want to hit your raise your hand feature. Student Rep Deborah Meskel.
Well, first I wanted to say thank you. This was a really, really big project and it took a really, really long time. And I think it really shows just how much thought was put into this. It's a really large amount of money and really impacts students directly. And that's why I kind of wanted to mention, well, I want to mention a few different things, but I'll start with this. The role of transparency and accountability in these funds. I think that students will be the first group that is affected by this. You know, they will understand how these funds are being used, and they'll understand if these funds are being used in the right way and how much impact the funds are having on them. And as I was on the advisory committee, and I was on the advisory committee as a student, and I was able to directly work with different student groups and ask them, like, how do you think these funds should be used? And work with different schools. And an overwhelming theme that I actually saw with students was that they didn't even know these funds existed, and they didn't know anything about them, the CARES Act or the ESSER funds. And I think especially like going into the school year and waiting to see what the impact of these funds will be, I think we not only need to kind of invest in understanding how much these affect students, but also invest in expanding students' knowledge of these funds. And so they can directly, tell their principals, their teachers, I feel like these things are working. Like, these are the things that are working, these are the things we should continue, these are the things that aren't continuing. A lot of the things that are on the agenda are pilot programs and things that we kind of haven't really done before. So I especially think kind of like moving into this new realm that we need to have that responsive and proactive approach. And yeah, so I definitely think we should kind of expand more on that transparency piece. And especially when it comes to different student groups, I know it was kind of under the mental health and socio-emotional learning, formally collaborating with citywide student government, which I'm a part of. But I believe that the board and also the administration as a whole should collaborate with students more and should collaborate with students groups more, especially when it comes to these funds. And so we kind of have a better idea of how they're directly impacting students. And the next thing I kind of want to talk about was specifically the social, emotional, and mental health piece. Going to South, I do have the benefit of having a psychologist at my school and several social workers, but the ratio from social workers to students is in hundreds. And so there truly isn't really a way to directly ask your social worker things. I've tried to talk with my psychologist on different occasions, and often there's a wait list, or I have to jump through a few different hurdles to kind of access those resources. And so I definitely agree that we not only have to increase the number of school psychologists and social workers, but increase the responsiveness and the culturally responsiveness of those psychologists, social workers who are working with students, especially in schools like mine, South, which is a very diverse neighborhood and a neighborhood that is not always the most safe. And where you often have things like shootings happening in the neighborhood, or just a very unsafe environment like going into school, and just knowing that the staff and social workers and psychologists are properly trained for those things when they're speaking with students.
Can we keep going? Okay. Director Jordan?
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I had just two quick things. Really quickly, when we're talking about PPE,
Are we providing our staff with like the best possible PPE, like N95 masks? Is that for everybody? I mean, are we doing that currently? Because I know there's been some confusion on that. And I'm just asking a clarifying question for that. Just because some people are wondering, is our teachers, are they provided with the best? And I said, yeah, I believe they are, but I'll ask that. And the other thing on the appendix, when we're talking about bus driver recruitment and retention, it's $2.4 million. I know that we have a bus driver shortage. I mean, that's just a given. And so, you know, like Max hasn't had a bus since Thursday afternoon. And just by chance, I'm able to drive him to school every day, but he hasn't had a bus since Thursday. We get robocalls every day saying, bus 12 at Page will not have a driver. You're going to have to come pick up your kid, or they will have to walk home. So, I mean, this is just, you know, and now today it was 3 buses at Page where there's no buses to get kids home. I think it was bus 6, 11, and 12. So like I said, Max hasn't had a bus since Thursday. So just by chance, I'm able to drive him to and from school every day, but I know this is not just a problem at Page. I know it's just a recurring, rolling issue. So with the bus driver recruitment and retention dollars, how exactly are we really going to go and hire more drivers so we don't have like these rolling bus cancellations, not just at my kids' school, but, you know, district-wide? What is our actual, you know, end game to address the issue? Because I know we're not the only district, you know, Stillwater, Robbinsdale, I mean, this is just, you know, it's a national issue. So how are we going to, actually what I'm trying to say is how are we going to best utilize those dollars is basically what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Jordan, I'm going to take all the members' questions and then have staff respond.
Yeah,
okay.
Okay.
Director Inns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I good? I don't have to push anything or, okay. All right, a couple of questions. One, just a larger general question. How is learning loss defined? So explicitly, you know, when we say that X amount of dollars has to be dedicated to learning loss, is that, I don't know, I don't know how to, simple question. How is it defined? And then I have a question about the MPS internal licensure program. And I was wondering if I could know a little bit more about the purpose and the scope of that. Are we talking about our Grow Your Own program? Are we talking about an expansion of our Grow Your Own program? Are we, who are the staff that are going to be responsible for that? I'm just trying to get a picture of what that is. I think it's a considerable expansion of what we're already doing, right? So I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to take all the questions, have staff respond. Thank you. Director Caprini.
So, oh, am I?
Yes, you're on.
Okay.
Yes.
Still getting used to this. Thank you, Director Enns, for asking that question. That was one of them. I'll scratch that off. Page 10, it spoke of credit recovery through experimental learning. Will that look somewhat like what happened over the summer with the We Win Foundation and how we partnered with that organization to be able to offer credit recovery for students in the district that were short credits and couldn't graduate? That's one thing. And then I wanted to just make a comment about the transparency piece with the ESSER dollars and the development of the dashboard. And then I really appreciate that, and I understand that it should be good to go within the next few days or a week or so. So that's going to be a great opportunity for the community to be able to, in real time, be able to watch how those dollars are being used so that they can, too, be more aware and help hold not only us accountable, but the district as well. So I'm very excited about the addition of that dashboard.
Thank you. Director Elamine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions that I do have. One being we mentioned here tonight how we are being very intentional about connecting with community and getting community voices. And I'm looking at some of the names with the advisory committee members, and being in the community, I'm just going to say that information has not came back to community. So I am concerned not only about transparency, but when we're selecting these members or giving these members an opportunity to be part of it, are we giving them expectations on what we want to see done in the community? And I know, Superintendent, we've had a brief discussion about this. And what I mean is that if we give an organization an opportunity to be part of the committee, are we telling that committee, that member, that we want them to go out into the community and share this information with community members? Are we giving them the resources to be able to do this, whether it's through a newsletter or whatever resources they may need to be able to be that advocate for us? And then we mentioned how we are looking to amplify what works. I think we can see it, say in the district, what, as a Black mother, it hasn't worked for our Black students. So we got to just look at different ways to do things along with these dollars that we are receiving. That was another point I wanted to make. And then I looked at the preserving of the teachers. We know that our numbers are going to change in some of the schools. Some numbers are going to go up and some are going to go down. Are we going to preserve and move those teachers where they're needed into the different schools? That's a concern I have too as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Student Rep. Gabramesco.
Yes, I just realized when I was making my comments, I didn't exactly phrase them as a question. So I guess more specifically, I want to know if it would be possible to expand the transparency piece to proactively engaging with students. And also when it comes to the mental health piece, making sure there are culturally responsive psychologists and social workers in schools.
Thank you. Superintendent?
All right, well, thank you, board directors, for your comments. I've tried to continue with the practice of categorizing these questions and putting them together, and so I have a number of staff that I'm going to point the questions to. So I'd first like to start, Student Representative Gabramesco, you talked about, and I had a hard time hearing a little bit of what you're saying, but I believe you talked about the engagement process of students and how can we refine the transparency of that and what does that look like. So I'm going to look to Senior Officer Moore and ask him to speak to, as part of our intent around the engagement with students, that is part of the commitment that we have with these ESSER3 dollars. Also ask him to speak to the question that came from Director Elamine around amplifying what works. And so if I could turn those two questions over to you, Senior Officer Moore, and have you address that as it relates to the ESSER3 process that we have here, amplifying student voice in the transparency as well. And then also the question or comment from Director Elamine, how do we identify and amplify what works? So some research practices there, or data analysis and evaluation.
Thank you, Superintendent. It is a little difficult to hear back here, so I appreciate you repeating that. So I'm really looking forward to the way that we are engaging student voice in this process. As part of the ESSER3 allocation, we do have dollars allocated to support citywide involvement in this process. We also have extended that work to youth evaluators at each of our middle and high school students. So the idea is that our citywide government will work with the research and evaluation team to identify key areas in ESSER3 allocations, and then we would actually come up with the evaluation design, and we would work together to talk about how to collect that information and feedback from students in each of our schools. So it's both a leadership development process for those students that are participating, but it also be an engagement process. And you know, the long-term goal is that as we're developing our accountability system, that we have a structure for parent voice, student voice, as well as community voice. And so that is built into the process. We talk about accountability. Youth voice will be part of that at an equal playing field and level as the teachers, staff, and community members. So that is a critical component. And there will be a number of opportunities for students, not only as we collect information, to provide the feedback back to the adults in the system about what works and what doesn't. So that is part of our continuous improvement process. In terms of the second question, identifying what works, I mean, that was deliberate in having a transparency and accountability focus. You know, as an evaluator, I just think it's critical that in order to be good stewards of funds that we do evaluate both process. So are we going to do what we say we're going to do? So those are commitments that we have to our community as we identify programs happening. Are they happening? The extent to which we want those to happen, and then what are the outcomes? So that process will be grouping some of the the identified expenditures, whatever's approved, trying to align that, taking our best attempt to align that to our strategic plan and our CDD work. So the work that we're already doing, so we want to bucket that to continue the work and use it as an enhancement, again, to enhance the student experience and or the adult experience in the system. So. You know, that is the work that we will be doing, and once we approve the allocations in the plan, then you can expect to see members of the board, superintendent, a very robust evaluation plan looking at both process as well as potential outcomes, and we can expect to see ongoing reports to both the board, the public via the dashboard and or in written form, just so we have confidence that this is such a significant amount of money that we are spending those dollars as stated, and that we're doing our best effort to make sure that we improve the experiences of people within the district.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've missed a couple of board directors, so I'm going to circle back to Director Ali. So your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I thank you also, Superintendent Graf. I would like to emphasize the importance of some of these funds to go to the community, particularly Black and brown communities. As you are all aware now, the situation of gun violence is really destroying our communities. And I want to see how best we can partner with the community leaders, particularly issues of how can we support community-oriented initiatives that can help out this, what I call it, honestly, crisis. How best we can invest our own families through preventing this gun violence that's happening in our backyards. So I want to say also that this is priority one for me as a board member, and I do believe my fellow board members also value the same. So I would be very thankful, Superintendent Graf, to make some comments on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Ali. I'm going to go to Director Cerrillo, and then Student Representative Gavramesco, and then we'll come back to Superintendent and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to start by a comment in the sense of being very mindful when we say extensive community engagement, because when it comes to the digital part of it, I know like only 70% of the surveys of our parents participated in that survey. And I want to know, like, how did that take place? Because I am a guardian in the district, and I did not even receive any type of communication. So I want to, like, know what was that process like. And when it comes to summer school and after-school programs, what is the level of, how does the accountability piece look like? Because, for example, we attended summer school, but I didn't get any type of printout or notification in the sense of like where my student was at. I mean, I don't want to like just invest money in something that we are not gonna be holding anybody accountable. Like, for example, community ed, reporting back to the board to letting us know like what is it that they are doing, what are the expectations of our students. Those are some of the things that I do have just questions about. Thank you.
Thank you. Student Rep. Deborah Mesco?
Oh, yeah, I just want to kind of expand on the student engagement part. And I understand that Citywide will be working with the board on a lot of these issues. And I personally believe that Minneapolis does a really good job when it comes to engaging with students. You know, having a student representative on the board, having Citywide, having other organizations. But I also feel like only working with those civic student groups is very limiting, because often the students who can be on those groups are more well off, don't have to work at home, don't have to babysit, and that often correlates with white students. Especially, you know, being an African-American student and being less well off and participating in a lot of these different groups, that's kind of the majority of the students that I see there. And that often kind of translate to, you know, we try our best to create a diverse group of students, but it's often impossible to do. And so I think what I want is the student engagement that I want to see when it comes to these ESSER funds, making sure that all students know about it and know what the ESSER funds are, and that also we're kind of directly communicating with them, because the students that we most want to impact with these funds are the ones that aren't going to be on those student groups, the ones that aren't going to be able to participate in Citywide, the ones that aren't going to be able to participate on the Youth Congress, the ones that wouldn't even have the time to come here and come for public comment. And so I think it's most important to get to those students, to tell them about these funds, and to understand if these funds are working for them. And that's kind of what I want at least a portion of these funds to go to and invest into, especially because I think a lot of students just don't even know the kind of things that happen on the board, or don't know the kind of voice they have in the district.
Thank you. Director Caprini.
Excuse me, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about the importance of us as colleagues, making sure that we are also participating in getting information out. I believe that a lot of us have social media platforms, and I'm not going to tout about my own use of social media to promote Minneapolis Public Schools, but I am quite often, quite frequently on social media and try and do my best to parcel out information that I know I can either respond to quickly, or it's just a matter of making sure that I'm sharing what information I'm getting from the MPS social media page. So, and I'm not at all here to you know, shame anyone or say whatever. It's just, I just want to remind us that we do have a responsibility to our colleagues, to our district, to our constituents. And I think it's important for us to really take that opportunity to make sure that we are sharing those tidbits of information. I've gone so far as to copy and paste some of the weekly board updates that I believe are really important, that are not confidential, that's clearly information. I typically wait until it's been put out through the Minneapolis Public School page, but that's also an avenue that I think that we can take. We have that ability to be able to look at our own emails from the superintendent, and after it's been made public on social media, what have you, you can copy and paste it and post it on your social media. So I just wanted to make that comment. We do have a responsibility ourselves.
Thank you, Director Caprini. Superintendent, staff, any comments?
So thank you again for the feedback. I'll again start. Student Representative Deborah Meskel, I'll start with your comment, and I apologize. I do think I understand, and I'll ask Senior Officer Moore to speak to it again. The engagement of students, specifically in this SR3 grant, there's the youth participatory evaluation which extends beyond the citywide, as well as some of those student groups that you mentioned. So Senior Officer Moore, can you speak to that again more specifically around the expansion of the YPE and what that looks like, targeting maybe again the student voices that will not necessarily have access to citywide or other opportunities like this type of discussion?
Yeah. Thank you, Superintendent, members of the board, Board Member Deborah Meskel. So specifically, citywide will help with the evaluation design, but we'll use our youth participatory evaluators at our school locations to collect data. And then that data will be analyzed, interpreted, co-interpreted, and then that will move back up to citywide student government. So we're using our students to reach other students, because what we've found, and I think you're also aware, that students are more likely to respond to students. And we'll also rely on students at the locations to, go beyond surveys, but we'll also do focus groups, different discussions, but we also tend to rely on our students to figure out the best way to collect the information. So students will be directly connecting with students and in various languages as well. So we will rely on both students on the design as well as the data collection as well as the interpretation. But there will be both a centralized process for design, and then there'll be a local process to collect the information. And we will be very cognizant, as you are, of making sure we get as many voices as possible. Typically, when we've used youth evaluation methods, student evaluation methods, we've been able to get better data, and we have higher response rates. And so that's the point of all of this work. I mean, that's just built centrally into this work.
Thank you, Senior Officer Moore. Again, and I will identify staff and then restate the question from the different directors so that we can get those responses. Next, I will ask Executive Officer Kelly to address the community information that was our engagement process, if you will, Executive Officer Kelly, and then speak to the community contracts that Director Ali asked about directly. You know, how are we engaging with the community and looking for their services and support of the needs that we have with our students. Thank you. Executive Officer Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Good evening. I'll start with the last question first. Director Ali, members of the board, we are in the process of developing, with the help of our finance team, as well as our partnership office, a community contract application that will be available online. We've allocated, as you'll see in the appendix, about $2.4 million. And that money is specifically set aside to contract with community-based organizations, particularly those that represent cultural communities, to partner with us, be it in the area of academic supports, social, emotional, or mental health supports, community engagement and outreach, and a variety of other areas. And so there will be an application process. That application is not complete yet. Obviously, we're going to wait until the entire process plays out. It will be available online, and it will follow many of our normal RFP processes, but we will be tweaking those, if you will, to reduce some of the barriers that have kept smaller organizations, community-based organizations, from participating with us in the past. So that is in process. We will be developing that consistent with federal guidelines and our own internal board policies regarding finance and contracts. And it will be widely distributed so that everyone in our community, those community-based organizations, have a chance to apply for those those contracts with us. So that is to Director Ali's question. And then regarding the engagement overall, you will recall that this was a very short timeline that began toward the end of the school year. And so we did not have our normal sort of robust community engagement where we go out and have large meetings or any of that. One of the ways that we try to increase our reach, although we will be reevaluating that based on feedback that we've gotten, is to partner with communities who then had reached out into specific, again, cultural communities, parent communities, et cetera, with the hope that, and with the explicit expectation, we did on more than one occasion explain to them how the process would work. I think that was one of the questions. That we did explicitly ask them to take the information they were given and develop feedback loops for those communities that they serve so that we could broaden those that we might be able to get to in a condensed amount of time. I do know that there were some community-based organizations, people on the committee who were very successful at that, who did take the information and did distribute it and did get feedback from parents and others in the community. And as I am now learning, there were some that were not as successful in doing that. So that will be part of our after action review to figure out what worked well, which groups worked well, and where we had some missteps. That was not our only engagement process. We also did, for those, we included our PACs in the process. So that was our Latino PAC, our Somali PAC, African American PAC, and our DPAC. Those those parent groups were also involved, and again, also asked to share out information. We did have online availability, so people independent of any of those groups could email us directly and give us feedback. We did get several dozen, under 100, but several dozen responses there. And we had a website developed that has additional information that is translated in multiple languages. And so this was, again, not our normal breadth of engagement due to the time frame we were working with, and because over the summer, it is more difficult to engage in that. We also did, at those events where we were out in community, take this information out. And we also met with, for instance, the tribal consultation. We did meet with them and present to them. There were other community groups that we met with throughout the summer individually and talked to those groups and got feedback from them so that we could get at least some representative information from the communities that we serve. So I would certainly be interested offline to hear from board directors where we didn't have as robust participation from some of the participants so that we can figure out how to correct that moving forward. I'm not sure if that answered all of the questions, Superintendent Graf, but happy to answer any more that I might have missed.
Thank you, Executive Officer Kelly. I'm going to move to the next set of questions that I have for staff. I'll ask Dr. Fearing to speak a little bit on a couple of items. I think it was Director Enns who mentioned learning loss. What is the definition of that? Director Caprini also talked about experiential learning, maybe giving some concrete examples of what that would look like. And then I know that there were questions around summer school and the data from summer school, and we obviously don't have that data at this point, but certainly any kind of examples you can give in discussing some of the summer school opportunities. So Dr. Fearing, I'll turn it over to you to respond to those questions.
Hi, good evening, Chair Allison, Board, Superintendent Graf. Thanks for being with us tonight. So I'll take the learning loss one first. Director Enns, thanks for the question. We're using that word only because that's really what's found in the ESSER and ARP. They use learning loss. I know there's a lot of conversation about, is that the right way? Is that deficit thinking? But really, I interpret the kind of the spirit of what they were asking for really in two veins. One are, what are some missed opportunities that our students and families had due to COVID distance learning? For example, that, we couldn't do live theater, right? That would be a missed opportunity. And learning loss, perhaps, if you want to say it that way. So what are some of the missed opportunities that our students and families would have had if we had been in person, but didn't because we were in distance learning and we were, and the pandemic was happening. The second part of the definition is learning that was interrupted due to COVID, due to distance learning. There's a lot of environmental things that happened to our families and to our communities. So there was a lot of interrupted learning there, whether it was, family is now sick with COVID or a death in the family or something happening outside the home. So we know that those environmental factors interrupted learning, but we also know that not having the in-person relationships, not having the opportunities to be with other people, there was also interrupted learning that we could not necessarily mitigate just through distance learning. So kind of thinking about those two areas and thinking about how we could be using the ESSER 3 dollars to help kind of fill in those gaps, right? So that's how I would have defined how ARP is using the words learning loss. And you probably would have seen that in our summer programming as well that we had this past summer. Not only were we trying to address the gaps that happened because of interrupted learning, but we were also trying to provide opportunities for students that they missed. So that's why we provided an expanded 9-12 arts opportunity, for example. We normally don't offer that in summer, but we did this summer because we knew that our students had missed a lot of those incredible opportunities during the school year at their high schools, and we wanted to be able to fill in those gaps. As far as experiential learning, so this has been top of mind for a few years. I know this because when I was at Wellstone, it was one of the ways we would differentiate teaching and learning for students. It was about acknowledging that there are experiences outside of the school walls that had equal, if not more value to our students' learning trajectory, but also being able to match those with the standards that they need to show proficiency in for graduation. And so we wanted to capitalize on some of those opportunities and think about, we've had contracts for, I'll give one example, for example, with Project Success. So they've done a lot of experiential learning with our students. They do outdoor adventures, for example, a lot of college tours, theater. If you've heard of the 9th graders all go to the Guthrie and experience a live play or musical. They do global experiences where they take students on international trips. And so we started to think, how could we utilize these experiential learning opportunities, one, to fill in the gap, right? Because they did not have these opportunities during distance learning, but then to also provide credit for high school students who needed that for graduation. So we tried to meld those two together. So what we're proposing is that we will have a list of experiential learning opportunities for our students to participate for or not for credit, right? But then really using those experiences as a way to bring back or be integrated into their core classes. So moving forward on that, I'm excited about the different potential opportunities that we have. We know that Achieve Minneapolis has also been very interested and wants to participate in how can we utilize the work that they do in their college and career centers as opportunities for our juniors and seniors to also earn credit, whether it's career pathway tours, college tours, et cetera. So it's really trying to tie and put 2 and 2 together. I think, were those the 2 questions, Superintendent Graf?
Yes, and then just the summer school data, which we've yet to get the formal information on.
Yeah, I will add, thanks for the question, Director Sturio, because we did do a lot of expanded summer programming this year. As you know, we expanded our High Five, we expanded special education, we expanded our EL services, our special education services, and all of the general education summer programming. We had the Spirit Sport Camps that we haven't had before in partnership with the Sana Foundation. And so we had a lot of expanded opportunities. And so the Community Education ALC, which really ran a lot of the summer programming, are putting together a report. So they'll have a presentation that they'll present to us, because we really want to see what had the most impact on students, whether you're looking at participation or teamwork, SEL, or even academic outcomes, so that then when we look toward next summer, we'll know what we want to keep, what we'll want to replicate. So we'll have a pretty comprehensive report from all the different programs that participated in some program, which would, I think somebody mentioned the We Win program, that would be one of them as well, so that we can take stock on what went well and then be able to continue next summer. So I'll share that as soon as we get it.
Thanks, Dr. Fearing. Next, I want to move to having Senior Officer DeVette speak to the questions from Director Jourdain around personal protective equipment and how we provide that for specific, or the N95 masks, and how we provide that specifically for a very specific staff. And then just revisiting again what our current practice has been around our bus drivers and what we're doing, and how we will, obviously, once we receive these grant dollars, continue to expand our support there.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Graf. First, with the N95 masks, we do supply N95 masks to our staff that are involved in direct student contact where the respiratory droplets being exchanged. There is, for an N95 mask to work correctly, there are fit testing and training, as well as medical certification, that is required. So what we're providing to our general staff population, very similar to what a lot of us are wearing tonight, and what the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health recommends is a close-fitting mask, similar to these disposable surgical masks that folks are wearing. So we've got surgical masks, disposable masks, we have cloth masks, and we have masks with clear cutouts, not cutouts, but clear masks for people who really need to be able to see the speech in order to kind of understand what's being said. So there's a variety of different face coverings that are available for MPS for staff who are looking for us to provide that, and for students. When people are looking for additional protections, they can also obtain face masks, face shields, if you would, to wear along with their disposable mask or cloth mask that either they're bringing from home or they're getting from the district. The use of N95 is not currently recommended broadly for school staff by federal or state health operations. And in the beginning of the pandemic, those, and they continue to be, are in relatively short supply. So if we were to try to order mass quantities, we would be impacting the availability of some of those supplies, potentially for our healthcare workers and others. So deliberately trying to make sure we use those where we need to. We've also provided those for staff who have a necessary accommodation. So certainly if somebody individually feels like they'd like to get N95 masks, we should work through that through our COVID leave team and accommodations staff. The second question about bus driver recruitment, we've seen a driver shortage across the nation for many years, and we've been relatively effective in some of the things that we've done up until this point in trying to address that. But we also know through survey data that provided by the National Association of Pupil Transportation that this is being described as a pretty critical issue across about 80% of the school districts across the nation. So with our current budget and ESSER funding, SR2 funding, what we were able to do was identify funds for recruitment and retention bonuses as we begin to, or as we continue to recruit for both our driver and training program, which we started several years ago offering paid training to drivers, as well as fully certified drivers who come in and join the district. So there's a $3,000 recruitment bonus as you join the district, and there's also a retention bonus included in that as you complete the year. So we'll certainly be looking at what do we do with the SR3 funds that we've earmarked to best work with our Teamster workforce in order to continue that driver recruitment. I should also note that it's important to remember too, I think, that approximately 50% of our bus routes are covered by contractors. So we need to balance kind of our own recruitment needs with helping support our contractors and keeping, a lot of our staffing issues are also coming from contractors as well as from our own shortages.
Thank you, Senior Officer DeVette. And then I'd like to ask Senior Officer Sullivan to speak to the question that came, I believe, from Director Enns regarding the MPS expansion for our licensure programming.
Charleston, Board Director, Superintendent, thanks for the question, Director Enns. This is actually an expansion of our pathway work. It's a little bit different than our residency, which is in partnership with the University of St. Thomas. This is actually us working through what has been a change in the state law a few years back, which allows entities other than higher education to become their own licensing bodies. So through this work, we're actually working to become our own licensing body, which allows us to remove a number of the barriers to entry to teaching. It also allows us, as we build out the program, to engage our parents and families and our students in the design of this work through PP and YP. And then finally, it also allows us to really focus the licensure pathway and that coursework, so to speak, on what Minneapolis really needs, again, aligned to state standards, but really in line with our needs and deep focus on equity here in Minneapolis. So it's a little bit different than our residency program, but it is another one of our deep pathways into teaching.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'd like to know a lot more about this, I think. I'm wondering about the barriers that we're going to remove. How does it allow us to remove barriers? And I'm trying to picture it. What kind of staff are we going to have that is going to be doing this training? How do we know that the teachers that we're going to be certifying are qualified teachers versus the teachers that currently go through a licensure program? Like, why are we going to be able to license teachers in a more effective way for our district than the licensure programs that already exist in the state? So I guess that would be the essential question I'd kind of want to have answered.
Senior Officer Sullivan, can you respond to a little bit of that? And then.
Absolutely. Thank you, Director, for the question. I think there are a few things. One, some of the barriers we're looking to remove, a big barrier is tuition. This will allow us to provide basically a tuition-free pathway to licensure, which we're really excited about. It also allows us to work with our current staffing constraints. So leaving your job to student teach is another barrier. We'll be able to work through that as well. In terms of the actual licensure, quality licensure program, we have to get certified just like any other licensing provider in the state, including our higher ed partners. So we'll be going through the same type of process, which includes a look at who our faculty is, what our coursework is. But again, I think we're looking at a program that could be grounded deeply in what Minneapolis needs, what we're being told by our students and our families, the experts we have in our that could be faculty in terms of our great teachers, our school leaders, community members. But it also needs to be grounded in the state standards and the deep content expertise we need for those different licensure pathways. So we're trying to bring in the best of all worlds, design our own program really deeply embedded with Minneapolis needs, and one that removes some of those critical barriers that we're hearing far too often prevent really incredible, talented people from becoming teachers.
Go. Sorry.
Thank you. Well, that's exciting. That sounds exciting, especially the possibility of, to me, removing tuition requirements, right? Are we then, the way our current residency program works, there's an expectation of service to the district then, if you are licensed through our program, provided we have opportunities for you. I know that's been a problem in the past, right? So how are we looking to, I assume there's a plan for that, but I guess I would like to know more about this. I don't know if I missed a public discussion about it or, but was it maybe at policy committee? Is some of this work being done about this program or, but I'd like to know a lot more about it, I think.
So Director Enns, we did, I think, just brief the board on the concept, in part because we knew we'd had to be reaching out to a public conversation with the state around this licensure and wanted you to be apprised of it. But we can certainly bring back more documentation or information, present that to the board either through
if we're committing
through an
funds
update.
through the ESSER program, right? I guess I'd like to know what those are being spent on.
Yeah, we certainly can do that, and that's part of this application process is for us to submit something to the state, and then of course we would provide updates to the board on it. But the idea is again looking to eliminate some of those barriers that we've heard from current employees who want to aspire to be educators but don't have the tuition, do not have the ability because they are already trying to make are engage in work and can't separate from that while they pursue their advancement of their education. And then the third part, again, to reinforce is just the idea of we've worked very closely with post-secondary education, universities, again, trying to align what we feel those specific needs are for our educators, whether that's around very content specific around literacy or cultural humility or the understanding of our school community needs. And so the opportunity for us to build on that, I think is where we've landed, but we'll be sure to put together some information for the board and look to, update you on the status and progress of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I think one of the concerns I think about that it raises for me is that, we have trouble retaining some of our probationary teachers as it stands right now. And so how is this going to intersect with that idea that, we need to do a better job of making sure that our probationary, our new hire teachers are getting the kind of mentorship, and we're providing an opportunity for them to be successful. And then how is that going to connect with the idea that we're then going to be licensure, we're providing licensure for people on what basis, in what fields, to what extent, all of those things I think are, we have to kind of tread lightly and make sure that whatever this program is, it's going to help us and not work against our own best interests, right? So I know that that's not your goal, right? You don't want to work against our own best interests. Obviously, this is, and I trust that that's what the intention is, and that all those great things that you stated, I 100% believe and have faith in you that that's what you want to accomplish. I just want to see the explicit examples of that before I'm going to vote on some funding for it. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Ellison.
Thank you, Superintendent and team. I know I've had conversations with other school districts about the ESSER monies that we're receiving from the federal government, and some directors have spoken with trepidation about how much money they're receiving, and a little fear about what are they going to do with this money, and are they going to do it right. I think it's an opportunity for us to show education is underfunded, and when we have the money, we can do it right. So I'm really looking forward to making sure that we do it right, the superintendent. And I think we're going to let's do an 8-minute break and come back at 7:35. Recess. Thank you. I'm going to call this meeting back to order. Superintendent Graf.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ellison. I wanted to just take a moment to ask Dr. Fearing to address just a little bit about the area of academics. I know that we referenced earlier that we had about 29% of these dollars being spent on academics, and we talked, of course, around the experiential learning through the questions that came from the board, and certainly recognize and acknowledge that, you know, through this pandemic, there were lost opportunities for our students, as well as there's a need for the mental health and social emotional support. But I would like her to talk a little bit about some of the materials or the curriculum and the training and specific academic skills that we are attempting to address through professional development, and offer that for the board's information this evening. So Dr. Fearing, if you would mind just expanding a little bit around the academics.
A technology glitch. Oh.
Just start back over from the recess on there. Okay.
I'm going to call this meeting back to order. Superintendent Graf, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I know we concluded right before recess here with some questions from board members, and I wanted to ask Dr. Fearing to maybe come back on and speak a little bit about the academic focus of this SR3 plan. We referenced that we have nearly 30% of these dollars going to address the learning of students, academics of students, and I thought it would be helpful to expand beyond what we've already shared around the experiential learning, maybe provide some context for some of the curricular materials or professional development or the skill development of our students that will be addressed throughout this grant opportunity. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Fearing, to share a few highlights.
Thank you. Yeah, the slide that you see in the presentation just has some highlighted bullets, but back in the appendix, there's more specific examples. But I did want to highlight, just looking at it's on the academic programs addressing learning loss slide. If you look toward the bottom where it talks about literacy and math intervention, acceleration, extension tools, and professional development, and then also right below it says early literacy professional development. I think it's important to highlight or maybe say a little bit more about what these are. So looking at the literacy intervention acceleration, again, as I had spoken to a little bit about what part of the definition of learning loss was the interrupted learning. And we know that literacy has definitely a sequence of how it should be taught and how students learn it. And so being able to use our screeners and our diagnostics, the assessments that we would be giving actually right now in the fall to our students, to be able to determine where are they at right now, and then also looking at the scope of where they need to be by the end of the year. And for many of our students, we know that there's going to have to be a lot of ground made up, especially in our early grades. And so what you see here, we've actually started working ahead. So using some of our ESSER2 money, that's the money that's available right now for your school year 21-22. Really investing in press. We've talked a little bit about that out of the University of Minnesota, that really focuses on core, but also focuses on what do you do next. So a tier 2 intervention, how to progress monitor, collect data, respond to that data, and then also starts to touch into tier 3. So we actually got a head start and trained teachers and trained building administrators this August, and the training will continue throughout this year. And so then for SR3, which would essentially start school year 22 and 23, or 22-23, this would carry that on so that we could continue the professional development and continue building our capacity, especially focusing on our early literacy teachers. The other thing too that we definitely found coming out of the pandemic is that we had some students who really excelled in distance learning and actually did much better than one maybe could predict. Just it could have been the learning model, it just could have been the pace. But we really need to also look at the other side of the spectrum for our students that did well and need more extension. I think one of the things is we've been reflecting on how we work with our students, especially in the younger grades in elementary, and kind of looking at the other side of our MTSS framework and how we extend. It doesn't necessarily mean giving them more work. It doesn't necessarily mean just go sit in a corner and do some independent reading, but it's actually looking at how you deepen the content understanding, how do you ask more critical questions. And so we've also been offering training to our staff, but also to our building-wide coaches, and how to extend further in literacy that way as well. So it's the both and, it's not just students at grade level, it's not just intervention, but it's also extension. And so we offered professional development in August. So we had shared inquiry, which is really more the extending part. And then we had a lot with the interventions. And I had mentioned, I think, at the committee of the whole that we also had held a special education literacy institute because we wanted to get a head start on that this year and provide that professional development. So in a few minutes, I'll defer over to Associate Cox and she can give a little bit more information on that. And then the next bullet down where it says early literacy professional development. So again, we wanted to get a head start here on 21-22, but the purpose of this bullet for ESSER 3 would be to continue on this for the next 2 years. But this is really focused on professional development through job embedded coaching. So again, most of you know, or all of you should know, we invested in our K-2 literacy and math TOSAs last year for our title schools. This year we've expanded to all elementary schools. So every single school has a 0.5 TOSA, teacher on special assignment. And we wanted to have someone on site that has the relationship, the connection with the teachers. Often these are teachers who've moved into these leadership positions from that school, to be able to work with grade level teams and individual teachers with professional development and job embedded coaching. So really a cycle might be, they meet with the teacher, they go over the lesson. This could be on phonics, phonemic awareness. This could be the writing part of the lesson. And they'll talk with the teacher, they'll discuss the literacy block, they'll come in and observe, they'll have conversation afterwards, determine what they want the focus or what they would like to work on. The coach could then the next day model a lesson for them. The teacher could watch, take notes, then have a meeting, and then the teacher could try it out the next day. So it's really that cycle, and it's building the capacity on site, because as you can imagine, at a district level, we would not have nearly enough people to be able to do that every site with every teacher. And so that bullet, the early literacy professional development, really is focusing on job embedded coaching that's focused on the alignment to the science of reading, the use of benchmark, the implementation of PRESS. They also would be doing classroom observations, feedback, and modeling, coaching, and then they would also be working at grade level or working and facilitating at grade level team meetings. So looking at the data that you would find from these assessments that I mentioned earlier, and then working with grade level teams on what they plan to do next. So these staff receive bi-monthly professional development in all those different areas that I just mentioned, from district level, from consultants, from the U of M, from various places. But again, I think that is one of our core strategies or leverage that we will be able to see student outcomes from, because we do know that we have a need for professional development, but to be more centered and site-based and not so much from a large district sit and get type of model. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Associate Cox, and maybe you can speak a little bit more ESSER 3 and the special education in terms of literacy that we budgeted out for, or it's in the proposal for.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Fair. And I just wanted to just do a shout out to the special education team. They're really increasing their capacity for both interventions and professional developments. And I'll just name a few. For our students who are Spanish speakers, we're looking at using Esperanza. So we're very excited about adding that to our repertoire of intervention materials, as well as the new Reading Mastery 2021 edition. At our 9th through 12th grade, that's an area we really wanted to focus on. They're looking at purchasing Reading Plus. We'll be ordering more Sunday kits, which are an Orton Gillingham based approach. Our ECSE are using Hooked on Phonics and really looking at phonemic awareness. We'll be upgrading our classroom libraries and also looking at new SIM strategies. Plus, we'll be renewing a lot of our licenses that we've been using through distance learning that have been working well for our students. So back to you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Associate Superintendent Cox and Dr. Freeman. I just wanted to take a minute to highlight, since many of the conversations we've had here this evening really stem from questions, and so I wanted to just make sure people understood that those were also elements of what's in this plan or this proposal, I guess, for the grant. Thank you, Chair Ellison.
Thank you, Superintendent and your team again. We're going to move on. For our next item, we're going to hear from the School Names Advisory Committee Chair, Student Representative Gabra Meskel. She's going to officially deliver their recommendations to us to offer some comments. As she gets ready to share, I'm going to remind us that the board formed the committee last year to research and provide recommendations regarding the names of MPS schools. We each appointed one member, with those representing a specific geographic area appointing someone from within their school district election area. Now that the advisory committee has completed its charge, it's our responsibility to determine the next steps and how we want to move forward with their recommendations. As a first step, I'll be referring this report to both our policy and finance committees, so members expect to see that item soon in your committees for further analysis. Once those committees have had a chance to review and comment, we will see this topic back before us in the board meeting. Finally, I want to publicly thank the committee members and the committee facilitator for their work on this. I was thoroughly impressed with how detailed the report was. It looks like they spent a lot of time going through it, and I know it was especially difficult having to meet completely virtually the whole time while everything was going on in our city and our world. So, Student Rep Gabra Meskel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So first, I just want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to serve as chairwoman of the committee. And it was a really amazing committee to work on, and we did a lot of really great work in the committee. I also want to quote the board and what our committee was supposed to do. So essentially, every student deserves a respectful learning environment in which their racial and ethnic diversity is valued and contributes to successful outcomes. And I also want to also acknowledge the circumstances in which the committee operated. During the trial of Derek Chauvin, over the course of COVID-19, our team met completely virtually, and the continued violence against Black and brown bodies, the trial against multiple different police officers at that time in Chicago, in Minneapolis, and across the country. And that significantly not only impacted our work, but continued us forward in our work as we kind of realized the depth and the importance of what we were doing. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that was on the committee. You know, we worked through really difficult times, and I think we all came together and created an amazing report and worked really hard in the research of these schools' names. So thank you to everyone that was involved. And I also wanted to kind of mention a couple of the recommendations that are in the report. I won't go into the different schools because there's a lot of different schools that are mentioned in this. So I will kind of mention a few different schools, including Sheridan, Jefferson, and Patrick Henry. And I know that those schools will be, have already had on their agenda an interest in changing their school names and understanding the history of those school names. And under this recommendation, they will be moving forward with that. I also wanted to mention some of the things that we did to kind of engage with students, understand how students and staff understood the school names in their communities. And so as a part of the spring student survey, in which grades 4, 6, and 8 participated, we got responses from students across Minneapolis and understanding how much they knew about the school names, how much this affected them, and also from staff. This significantly impacted our research and going into this as well. Yeah, and I also just wanted to really quickly mention a couple of recommendations in the future that our committee made, specifically in investing in the research of facility names. I don't think this should be a one and done process, and I think in the future especially we should be more proactive when deciding these kinds of things. A lot of the names that we researched and that we saw, I think we all agree that no school should be named after those people. And especially I think it's important to note that just because someone has done a single good deed did not make them a good person. And so naming a school after that person for a single good deed they've done and not looking at the entire history of who they are is a really big short sight. And it really goes against, I think, the message of MPS and the environment we want students to be in. And so that includes investing in research around facility names. I know moving forward that most school names have to go on kind of a number of guidelines and reviewing who these schools are being named after. And I think everyone on the committee agreed that the name of a school is kind of the way the school is seen, and it's the way the students see the school. So it's really important that students understand, and this is one of the recommendations, understand who that person is and how it connects to them specifically. And I know that one of the recommendations moving forward with school names is having them have a tie to Minnesota. And so kind of teaching students about those school names as well. And just making sure that in the future we may reform this committee so that we can review more school names, and as some of these school names are changed, reviewing them again to make sure they align more with Minneapolis practices. Yeah. And just another thank you to everyone that was involved. It was, I think, a really important thing that we did, and a really amazing thing that we did.
Thank you. Directors, any questions, comments? Hit the request to speak so I can see you in the queue. Director Caprini?
Thank you. Thank you, Student Representative Deborah Meskel, for the work that the committee did. Outstanding. I've still taken in a lot of the information that was discussed and written. Thank you to everyone that was involved. I just also want to say thank you to the board for taking this on to say that we collectively want to ensure that this isn't something that's laying heavily on principals and school communities to make the decision or have the conversations about what should or shouldn't happen. We're simply saying, yes, if that's what the school community wants, here, yes or no, or what have you, we are providing that opportunity for it to happen. I say this because of the heavy work that was laid upon the principal at Henry High School, and the response from many people that were incredibly negative. Lots of supporters, but there were also some very heavy experiences that he had to deal with. And I have so much respect for him as a black man, as a black leader, and he really did an amazing job holding all of that. But I'm very happy that we were able to give the community the opportunity to just make that decision. I'm still excited about being a part of the conversations. I'm really excited about people learning more about who these people are. I do believe it's important for us to have that historical knowledge about the different school names. I personally would prefer not to have schools named after people, but that's my own opinion, and I realize that that work will be done by the community. I'd also like to say I'm really excited that there's that financial piece of it that's going to be laid upon the finance committee to really, or finance department and committee, to lay out that parameter, give folks a scope of what it's going to cost, stage by stage, so folks know what they're working towards, because it is a very expensive undertaking when you think about all of the different components of having to go through changing the name, school colors, mascots, whatever the case may be. So I really appreciate the work. I'm excited to hear more information about the individual conversations that happen at our school and all of our schools. And this is an exciting time, in my opinion, for Minneapolis Public Schools. So thank you very much, Chair Ellison.
Thank you. Director Arneson.
I imagine it would be a little anticlimactic if I just said ditto after Director Caprini, but I also wanted to just make sure we thank our committee members and as somebody who's worked on bringing this forward. To Director Caprini's point, the names are about values, and the values is something that the board holds, right? And so that's our responsibility to kind of figure out our values, and that's why we went upon this work. And so I just really appreciate the volunteers, and they were volunteers who did the kind of the heavy work of doing some background research. And I think if we learned anything, naming a building is never casual. There are consequences, right? And I don't know what happened. Some of these buildings are very old, and I don't know how they came to that process, but I would argue that I suspect that perhaps they were maybe a little casual about it, right? And so it's great that, so for those listening who are saying, why are we not spending more time or taking action tonight? Now that we have this information, it's really important that we process it and take our time to make sure that as we move to the next steps, we do so in a way that has a name that has value. And as Director Caprini points out, there are financial obligations that will come with that. There are policies that actually need to be changed, and so we do need to spend some time in our committees to process our next logistical steps so that we can do this with care and end up with names. I am with you, especially after reading this report. I'm not sure we should name a building after a person ever again, really, but that is all part of our process. So thank you to all our volunteers who helped us with this, and obviously there will be more to come.
Thank you, Director Arneson. Director Surreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say how excited and happy I am that the board took this initiative before I even came to sit here with you all. And I'm a little biased in the sense that Jefferson, is the school that my nephew attends, and that we have a lot of students of color. And I'm just thrilled to see what the future of the environment at the school is going to look like. And this is something that we should be celebrating and posting, social media, in the news, and, all over the place. And I also, when I was told that I needed to appoint a representative for this committee, I was so excited to appoint actually a retired educator, that gave over 30 years of her service to our children here. So I'm just really, really happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Surreal. Director Inns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also want to say thank you to the committee and the folks that did the work on this. And such a great detailed report that was so thoughtful and contemplative. And as a social studies teacher myself, I thought it was just great work that they did, and I'm so grateful for it. I think that to the question that Director Arneson raised about how our buildings came to their initial names that they had. I mean, these buildings are in some cases over 100 years old. The names are 100 years old, and they reflect really, in some cases, maybe the values of our city 100 years ago, or some of the people in our city 100 years ago, or our past, or the past of our country. And I think, obviously, the world is different now, right? And we have made some progress. And if we're going to make more progress, we need to honor those that have given us progress to the point where we are now, and that will in the future. I don't think that, I get the idea that, we don't necessarily want to name our buildings after people, but we do want to honor the values and the virtues that this board is reflective of, and that we want our city to be reflective of. So it does matter. I don't think we want to just say, oh, we're going to take values out of the equation and we're just going to name one building like North Minneapolis, one South, one, the names that we give to things and the things that we honor and the virtues that are reflected in those things, I think are important. And I think it's good that we are going through a process to get rid of some of those values of the past and move us into the future. So, and that we've done so in a way that is transparent and clear, and it's really gratifying for me to think about. And so thank you so much for leading that work and being the chair of that group, student representative. And I think it's so great that we had a student that was the chair of that group as well. And it's just, the report is really incredible. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Inns. Director Elamine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, just echoing really the words that everyone has said. I too learned a lot from the reports that was given to us to look at, to study. But I also wanted to mention just the intention that came behind it. That's what stuck with me the most, giving each of the directors the opportunity to select someone to have representation. That spoke volumes to me as well, with getting community involved and making sure that the community was aware. So again, thank you for taking the charge and really representing us, and it was amazing, and thank you to the volunteers as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So next steps is going to committee before it comes back to us here. Next item on the report tonight on the agenda is Policy Committee report, including any policy recommendations for first reading. Policy Chair Pauly, please go ahead with the committee report.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Ellison. The Policy Committee has recommended 2 policy changes for our first reading tonight. First is the adoption of a new policy, specifically addressing board director elections. A number of the provisions are basically codifying provisions in state law in our policy for clarity's sake, but there's one notable substantial item which would confirm that the school board shall use the same districts as the park board. And the timing of this is important because, as required by law, those districts are being redrawn now in response to the most recent census. So while state law gives us the option to either use the park board districts or draw our own, the Policy Committee is recommending that for the benefit of voters and taxpayers, we continue to use the park board districts. The second item is amending just one line in Policy 3270, which deals with sales and leases of district property. The policy change would specially authorize the superintendent to outline in regulation a process that could be used in the event that the district wants to either sell or lease a surplus facility. And thanks to the superintendent and his operations team for sharing a draft regulation alongside the policy, which we saw in Policy Committee, which would create a transparent and standardized process with what can be a complicated topic. Chair Ellison, that is the committee's report for this month.
Thank you, Director Pauly. Directors, any questions? And as I wait for anybody to pop up in my queue, I'm going to remind folks that this is a first reading and we'll be voting on these policies next month. Okay. Seeing no questions or comments, we will move on to the next item. Next, we're going to vote on several items. First is approval of the consent agenda. The consent agenda includes routine items that do not involve major policy, budget, or taxing decisions, bond awards, or items related to the superintendent's contract or evaluation. Director Caprini, will you please move approval of this item?
So moved.
May I please get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Approval of the consent agenda has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Jordan?
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I just wanted to bring attention to number 8D, which is authorizing a COVID vaccination requirement for employees and certain contractors, partners, and volunteers. I'm wondering if I can offer an amendment to include all students as well, because I think.
Just a point of order, Director Jordan. I think you're asking maybe you want to make a motion to pull off that
yes.
item,
Yeah.
and then we can discuss that.
Yes.
Right?
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So, consent agenda as amended. We're going to pull off item
8D.
Chair Ellison, yeah, just a note for the good of the order. That item is not in the consent agenda. It's listed separately.
Oh, we're just discussing consent agenda currently.
I know it looks a little confusing, but I think it's right below. The agenda item you're referring to, I believe, is right below the consent agenda.
Okay, we'll draw that then.
Yep.
Okay. So any other comments, consent agenda? Seeing none, Director Polly, can you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Aye.
Elamine. Ali.
Yes.
Sureo. Inns.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Caprini.
Aye.
Polly is yes. Ellison.
Yes, thank you. That motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. Our next item is the resolution setting the initial property tax levy to the maximum level allowed for next year. This is just the first step in the process, with the final vote to set the final levy happening at our December meeting after public comment about that. Director Caprini, will you please move this resolution?
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second for approval of resolution labeled as 2021-0043, pre-certifying the property tax levy to the maximum. Is there any discussion? Director Jordan?
Go.
No? Okay. Seeing no discussion, Clerk Polly, will you please call the roll on this resolution?
Arneson.
Aye.
Elamine.
Aye.
Ali.
Yes.
Sureo.
Yes.
Inns.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Caprini.
Aye.
Polly is yes. Ellison.
Aye, that motion carries and the resolution is approved. Our next item is the resolution accepting the American Rescue Plan grant and directing the superintendent and his team to submit the application. Director Caprini, can I please get a motion?
So moved. Second.
All right.
I second.
Thank you, Director Ali. Approval of the resolution labeled as 2021-0047 regarding the ARP federal grant has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing no hands, Clerk Polly, will you please call the roll on the resolution? Oh, I'm sorry. Director Elamine, thank you.
Just wanted some clarification. So we are voting to allow it to be pushed through, but not to actually go for. Can you just explain a little more for me, for clarity?
Superintendent.
The resolution specifically.
Sure.
Director Elamine, Chair Ellison, the request is to accept the American Rescue Plan and authorize us to submit the application. The state still has to approve our application, which is something that we have not completed yet. It's an October 1st deadline. And so what this allows us to do is move forward with the proposal that we have in front of you as part of the application process. The state will then authorize to accept that, and then they will be awarding us those dollars, and we will come back and share with the board when we receive those dollars in budget amendments so that we can adjust our budget accordingly. So it is again our application to the state that has to be submitted, and we are looking for board approval to submit that application based on the information we presented here this evening.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, Director Polly, can you please call the roll on this resolution?
Arneson.
Aye.
Elamine.
Aye.
Ali.
Yes.
Sureo.
Yes.
Inns.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Caprini.
Aye.
Polly is yes. Ellison.
Yes, thank you. That motion carries and the resolution is approved. Next up is the resolution authorizing a COVID-19 vaccination requirement for all MPS employees, as well as certain contractors, partners, volunteers who have direct contact with students. I will move this item to bring it in front of us. Can I please get a second? Thank you. Approval of the resolution labeled as 2021-0048 has been moved and seconded. While our speaker queue gets set with any director questions or comments, Superintendent Graf, could you please speak to this item?
Thank you again, Chair Ellison. In addition to my earlier comments, I just want to add that these conversations around vaccines have been happening across the nation. As you know, we're a member of the Council of Great City Schools. I attend weekly conversations with urban superintendents, and this is top of mind for many of them, currently considering vaccine mandates for teachers, for staff, obviously in some cases for students as well. And as I've consulted with my peers locally and nationally, I think the commonality across all the districts, including Minneapolis Public Schools, is the belief that a high vaccination rate among our staff is critical to keeping our schools open for in-person instruction and protecting our students, especially our students who are under the age of 12 and currently cannot get a vaccine. I will note also that while some districts have adopted a policy that is vaccine or nothing, we're asking instead the board to adopt an approach that provides consideration for proof of vaccination or regular testing. And this could be perhaps once a week in lieu of getting vaccinated by, or in lieu of vaccination. We do believe that the vaccine or testing strategy can be most effective in keeping our schools safe, along with other mitigation factors and strategies. And since we have drafted the resolution and put this forward to the board this evening, President Biden has ordered mandatory vaccination for nearly 300,000 educators in the federal Head Start program and at more than 200 federally run schools. He also announced that he would use the Defense Production Act to increase the production of rapid testing kits and would work with retailers to expand their availability. And I know that that is certainly one of the considerations we have been working through right now as to how we can provide that access for testing in the cases where people are unable or have chosen not to get vaccinated. As the President's staff has pointed out, vaccines are highly effective at preventing the spread of the infectious disease, which is why schools require vaccination against measles, mumps, and other childhood ailments. And so again, we believe for our district that the path forward we're providing here today is the best approach, and we look forward to the board's discussion this evening. And I do have staff available to answer considerations around both the operationalization of it as well as what the consideration might be for supporting staff.
Thank you, Superintendent. Director Jordan.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I would just like to offer an amendment to include all students to be mandatorily vaccinated within, offering the legal exemptions that we are required by law. Because I think nobody knows what flu season is going to look like. Nobody knows, and flu and COVID offer some of the same medical symptoms when diagnosed. But I think it's the right thing to do, whether, I don't know. I'm just worried about, my own kids going to school. They go to 2 large schools, and all it takes is one kid and we're quarantining. But I think it's the right thing to do for our staff and our students to include mandatory vaccinations for everybody. Los Angeles United School District recently did that, offered mandatory vaccinations for all students as well. So that would be an amendment that I would like to make to this resolution.
Okay, thank you, Director Jordan. So this is a motion to amend the amendment. Is there a second? No.
I just have a question.
I know you have a question. Can we finish the?
I'll second it so that we can have it.
Okay. So there's a motion and a second. Any discussion to amend the amendment to include students 12 who can get the vaccination? Who's at some point so students who are eligible to receive the vaccine. Okay. Discussion. Director Inns, do you want to this?
Yeah, I'm wondering. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering, Superintendent Graf, discussions that staff has had about requiring students to be vaccinated thus far, and some of the impact of that at the state level, et cetera, what the discussion has been.
Thank you. Director Enns for the question. And so what I will do is I'll reference conversations that I've had with my colleagues across the nation, and I can also look to have some staff who've been involved in some of these discussions as well. I think Senior Officer Sullivan partakes in some of those conversations, but it primarily has focused first around staff because as employers, working directly with those adults who are, the most at risk at this time of being able to manage their vaccines. That's where it has started with a lot of our district conversations. In the area of students, it's a little more challenging because we do not have universal vaccines that have been provided for students in all of our grades. We certainly have that for ages 12 and above. That is one that has come out through just one of the current vendors, if you will. And so a lot of the districts that have been referenced, with going with those mandates, they've looked at dates outside of the next month or so. They're looking several months ahead because there's also the concern of what do you do with the students? If you have students who are not able to be vaccinated for different family decisions or reasons, what happens to their learning and what are you providing for them as an educational opportunity for those students? Have had conversations with districts about the implementation of those vaccines, and the monitoring of those vaccines. And certainly the trade-off is what are you going to do when a student doesn't provide that information? It's not that they don't want to be vaccinated, it's saying it's that they've been vaccinated, but they don't have that information available to them. So there's coordination that has to happen at the state level or where the department collects that data. So it's a lot of consideration for the actual operationalizing of the students. I have not seen a lot of districts moving to that in the first couple of months of the school year. It's been more a case of as we come back in January, we'll look to do that. And they start with waves. They start with the students right now who are able to get vaccines, ages 12 and above. They've not focused on the younger students. And I think the big risk is declaring that this is what we're going to do and then not having the resources or the ability to operationalize it. And it creates greater angst within the organization and the community. So as far as what we've discussed in terms of Minneapolis Public Schools, our focus has been around our staff. And you note that we are looking across all of our organization. We're not looking for just teachers in the classroom or people who are working in buildings. Anyone who has a direct contact, to include visitors or volunteers or contractors in the district. So that's where our priority has been. And certainly we're open to, doing more research on what that would look like for students. But I would say at this point, if you were to direct the administration to do that for students, I couldn't give you a sense of what that would look like. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that it's something that I could implement because I think the work we've done now, even with our staff, has been, for several months, it's been a consideration for us to move in this direction. And we've been working through our process of how would we operationalize it? How do we ensure that, we're even getting our staff, information that we can support around whether or not they've had the vaccine, and then how we would give them those regularly scheduled tests.
So if we were to, the resolution that we have prior to the amendment is for staff, right? If we just say for the sake of example, we pass that without the amendment, what would be the process for going back and saying, okay, now we need to make sure that all the students are, we have a system in place. Would it go before the board again? Would we have to pass a resolution? Could the administration make that decision? Could we just in a couple of weeks say, you know what, we could do it now, so we're going to do it? I think for what I'm hearing you say is that it's not that maybe we don't want to do it, it's just we don't really know how we could do it right now.
So Director Enns, I think that's exactly it, and that's kind of the approach we've taken with the staffing consideration, is that this is something that we have been long, kind of processing about. It's a value that we think we have as an organization, and have brought it to the board because we were mindful of the timing of it as the start of school year, but we still have to operationalize it. And that's the piece that I would say we first need to start with staff, but yes, in the future, if we felt like there was an opportunity and we were able to be successful with our staffing situation and the vaccine, I think it would be something we could bring back to the board for discussion. This is not something I, as the superintendent, would unilaterally decide because of the implications that it has across our city. The same to be said here with this vaccine requirement for employees, because it ranges across all our bargaining groups and it extends well beyond a value conversation. There are financial implications associated with this. There are employment implications associated with this from individuals who have strong opinions around whether or not they want to partake in a vaccine or subject themselves to weekly testing.
So even the, I guess, part of what I'm hearing is that even the staff vaccine mandate that I believe we're about to pass, right? Even the staff vaccine mandate is going to be difficult and challenging to implement. Maybe we wanted to do it even a couple of months ago, but we weren't sure how we could make it work. And so even that's going to be challenging. To add this piece on top of it, to have it be students, and then you consider like absences or students not, and learn all these other issues, right? That we're not ready for that right now is kind of what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, again, I think you're right. I don't want to keep restating it, but I think, for us to operationalize what we presented here in front of the board tonight is going to take a great deal of work. We do not have the internal capacity to provide the level of regular testing in my mind, an ideal way, without adding additional resources and support. So we prefer to use vendors, but in my conversations with other districts across the nation, they've had vendors walk away from this, weekly testing that they are trying to implement. Certainly they have a different, population that we might have, but it's a large urban district. And I think that's something that, people need to understand and recognize. This is not about us not wanting to do it or not feeling like it's important. It's more about what will we be able to deliver on and consistently provide for our students and our families in this conversation about, requiring vaccines for our employees and contractors and partners and volunteers. And that's not to say that the student one is not important, but I think where we're starting right now is with our employees who we feel like have the most opportunity to be vaccinated, and have, at least through the survey that we've recently given, we have not have, I think we had a response around 65% of our employees respond, but in there we had a strong number of people who've already received the vaccine. And so that's given us, indication and promise that this would be well received, but it's still an implementation challenge that we're going to have to wrestle with, and that's part of what we want the board to understand and the public to understand as well, is that we still have to go through that.
Thank you. Student Representative Graf-Meskel.
Yeah, I also wanted to speak on that really quickly. In the act of asking all students and requiring them to be vaccinated, for most students who haven't gotten their vaccination yet, that's because of the views that their parents have. And so asking them to get that vaccine, you're asking them to go against their parents and to go against their family in that way. And I don't think, especially for their mental well-being, that's the right way to go about it right now, especially when it comes to like what the alternative would be. If they chose not to get the vaccine, would they have to move from in-person schooling to the virtual, like the completely separate virtual school that's been set up? Would they have to get testing every single week, and how would that be available for students? And so I think the thing is exactly what Superintendent Graf said. It's just a really big logistical thing, and I think for a lot of students it would just do more harm than good, especially for the students who haven't had the opportunity to be vaccinated yet. But I would say that the thing about the vaccine is the access that it has. I know a lot of people who are undocumented or don't have access to insurance, and they were able to get the vaccine because it was offered universally and they were able to get it for free. And so schools were able to offer a day in which the vaccine, and students can get one shot of the vaccine and then 2 weeks later can get another shot of the vaccine. Or there could be events where students were invited to, get access to the vaccine. I think that would be a lot more beneficial for students, and where they were kind of proactively and asked, come and you have this chance to get the vaccine, especially as most schools, including South, they have clinics in the schools, and they would be able to set those things up.
Thank you. Director Arneson.
Thanks. We've spoken a lot to logistics, and I agree. I know that we've had some clinics. We worked with the health department, and they've come in and done some vaccine clinics at our high schools or middle schools, right? Especially when kids were 12 and up were first eligible, and I know that's beneficial. I think the vaccine, this logistical debate, I think it's interesting as I think organizations, I kind of see two patterns, which has been discussed here. Some organizations have came out very early saying we're going to mandate vaccines or testings, but they weren't able to implement right away because it took them X number of months to figure out how it was going to happen. Or you take our approach, which is we're going to figure out how we can do this, and then we're doing it. Either approach, I think we're implementing around the same time because there's only so fast that this is a new, unprecedented situation. And so we're all trying to figure out how this works. So I've noticed that. Second, the question I have, I guess I'd love to get the opinion, our legal opinion, right? Because I do know that as employers initially, early on, started requiring this, they of course were challenged in the courts. And I don't think that mandates for the students, 12 to 17-year-olds, have been mandated in schools, or maybe they have, but certainly not much. So I don't know if there is a legal opinion about that, but would love to hear if there would potentially be legal ramifications of trying to kind of lead and be the first, perhaps in the state or even in the nation, in something like this, or how that normally works with childhood vaccinations. I don't know that I think it's done at the state level and not district by district typically. So I don't know if there's legal opinion on that from Council Moore, but would be interested.
Chair Ellison, if I may ask General Counsel Moore to give her an opportunity to speak to the discussion about student requirements for COVID vaccines. And I will say I do know that there have been declarations of making this a requirement for students in some districts outside of Minnesota. I don't know that it has been pre-K through 12. It's obviously, as it becomes available, but I think there's always a litigious argument to be made around that. So General Counsel Moore, if you are available to speak to maybe the legal aspect of requiring vaccines for students.
And not to interrupt, but to just say declarations and implementation are two different things, absolutely. Right?
General Pasha.
Directors, and thank you, Chair, Director Arneson, you're absolutely right. Implementation, very different and separate from whether we can make the declaration. Given the fast pace of how everything's been going, that is not a question that's been directly posited to me yet, so I haven't done full review. The fact that we do have vaccination requirements for students already, that is something that's separate and different than what we'd be looking at for authority for this particular vaccination. So I would have to do some review and provide you an opinion on that. That is something that the board would like us to look into. It is important to note that the resolution that you're looking at tonight for staff and partners, it's a vaccination or weekly testing. So, that would also be something that we want to look at if we were going to go forward and see what we could do with students. Are you looking at it has to be this or either or?
Thank you. That's helpful for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Caprini.
Excuse me. So I just wanted to ask this. So when General Counsel Moore just said it's a vaccination or testing, people would still need to provide proof that they had been vaccinated with whatever card they write, correct?
To not have to do the testing.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that people understood that, yes, you do still need to provide us with a card of some sort that has the
Right.
dates on it. It's not just saying you can get well, we want you to get vaccinated, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I'm vaccinated, so I wanted to show my card.
You want-
Okay. All right, I just want to make that sure
And
that
if you
was
do not
clear.
want to show your card, even though you're vaccinated, then you would need to do the
Exactly.
the
No,
test.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. yeah.
So, Chair,
Superintendent.
sorry to interrupt, Chair Ellison. I think those are some of the details we have to work out because there is a privacy associated with that. And so I don't want to misrepresent what we're asking for here. We're talking about individuals who are employees of Minneapolis Public Schools. And under our employment kind of consideration, if you falsify information, that's a different conversation we have with an employee. So the expectation is that if this passes and we ask the question, have you been vaccinated? And you offer up a positive, yes, I've been vaccinated, and we come to find out later on that that is not factual information, then we would move toward our normal process of an individual giving us false information. So, because I think the challenge we are talking about is how do you retain that information in a confidential manner? Because that is still private information of the individual. It's owned by the individual, and so we're, trying to figure out a way to operationalize this without, violating anyone's privacy, and recognizing that if an employee is not able to get vaccinated, because there are medical circumstances that would prevent some people from doing that, we have to provide that other option, which is to receive regular testing. So I just want to verify that, those are the details we have to work out, and certainly have to take into account the privacy of the individual, and how we, would again look to operationalize that and retain that information on a regular basis and monitor that information on a regular basis.
Thank you, Superintendent. Director Elamine.
I just wanted to ask, this applies to us as board directors too as well, correct? Having to show that either we've been vaccinated, or would we have to do the same requirement of?
So the way that we have it is anyone who has direct contact with students, I believe, is what does the resolution say specifically?
Chair Ellison, Superintendent Graf, the resolution specifies all employees, and I believe for interpretation purposes, we would in fact consider board directors employees.
Okay.
There's a few different ways to define board directors, and then comma, all contractors, volunteers, and community partners who have direct contact with students. So imagine a contractor with whom we work, and they work for IT, and they never set foot inside of Minneapolis. We wouldn't be able to enforce a vaccination requirement for them. But if you're a contractor or a vendor who works with MPS that comes in and works with students, then you would also be held accountable to it. So I believe our interpretation would be yes, that board directors are considered as an employee for the purposes of this resolution.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we have an amendment on the floor to include students eligible for the vaccination in this amendment. Any other discussion, questions about that? Director Powley, can you please call the roll on the amendment to include students?
Arneson.
No.
Elamine.
No.
Ali.
No.
Cirillo. Inns.
No.
Jordan.
Yes.
Caprini.
Nay.
Polly's a no. Ellison.
No, thank you. That amendment fails. Now, any discussion, before we go on, Superintendent, I'm hoping we continue to allow, to have clinics for students who want to get the vaccination as we have done in the past.
So just to clarify, the question was, hope we allow students to get access to the vaccination clinics. And we certainly work in partnership with the Minnesota Department of Health, Minneapolis Health Department, and are continuing those opportunities. I will say that we did have discussion as well about testing, and certainly that has shifted a little bit because of the range of people being present for those testing opportunities. But we are meeting with our regional support team and are engaged on an ongoing basis with the Minneapolis Health Department. So our support and our interest in getting vaccines out to members of the Minneapolis community remains very strong.
Okay, thank you. So now going to move to the amendment, to the resolution. Thank you. To the resolution labeled 2021-0048. We moved in second. Any discussion on the resolution? Director Elamine.
Just another quick question in regards to the operation, and we did briefly speak on it. Being the concern with the testing and having to have the testing sites at all the different schools, I know I've worked with a couple of different nonprofit organizations, and we've had the opportunity to do self-testing. I'm just wondering, would that be an option should we fall into that era where we don't have, we can't get the vendors or we're not able to provide that testing? What is the other option that we have in place to be able to accommodate our staff?
So Director Elamine, thank you for the question. Again, I'll ask Senior Officer DeVette to support the response to your question, but I want to, again, take the approach that because we are looking at having all of our employees across the district, as well as contractors, partners, and volunteers, I feel strongly that we really want to make sure we're providing that operationally possible within the workday and the work environment. And so that is our priority, that is our focus right now. But as you mentioned, if we're not successful in securing that as a possibility, then I think we are looking at other considerations as to how that would work. But certainly the testing is available citywide. I talked to an individual the other day. They said they went to the airport to get testing completed. And so there are testing opportunities for anyone across the city of Minneapolis, and certainly would encourage all individuals, if they feel like they have those symptoms or they feel like they are potentially at risk of some interaction that they've had, that they take advantage of that. So that would be something that I think we all as individuals can take our personal responsibility to do. But when we're talking about this as a vaccine, requirement across our employee groups, I think my desire is to have that available consistently for all of our employees within the work schedule that they have in front of them. Senior Officer DeVette, anything to further add on that?
Thank you, Superintendent Graf, members of the board. As we've spoken about, or Superintendent has spoken about, we're working to operationalize the testing, the required testing for any staff that doesn't certify that they're vaccinated. I just want to mention that we currently have take-home testing kits available for any staff or student who would like to take one home and test. So that remains in place for voluntary testing if anyone wants to pursue that option. And so what we're looking at, to Superintendent Graf's statement, is how can we operationalize testing being for non-vaccinated staff being available, preferably during their workday, preferably at the work site, and that's what we're working to stand up and operationalize at this point.
Okay. Director Inns?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that this is probably the easiest decision that I think I've had on the board in 7 years. I feel like our responsibility is clear to make sure that our employees have a safe workplace in as much as we can, and that our students have a safe place to go to school. It's really disappointing to me that there's been a lack of leadership nationwide and that other elected officials don't see this decision as easy as I see it. When you think about the where we were a year ago and how we were desperate for a vaccine, and I know as a teacher myself, we were thinking, when are we going to get back to school? It's never going to happen until we have a vaccine, some of us were saying. And now we have one, and that we have to mandate its use in any respect is, to me, just unfathomable. So it's super easy decision. I hope all the other board members feel that way. And I'm excited that the staff has put in all this work and gotten us to this point. I wish we could have done it a month ago. before the school year started, but I'm glad that we're doing it now. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Inns. Seeing no further discussion, Director Polly, can you please call the roll?
Arneson.
Aye.
Elamine.
Aye.
Ali.
Yes.
Cirio. Inns.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Caprini.
Aye.
Polly is yes. Ellison.
Yes, thank you. That motion carries and the resolution is approved. Thank you, everybody, for that discussion. Our final item tonight, prior to director reports, is an initial discussion on the proposed amendment to the Minnesota Constitution for consideration as we begin the process to determine our legislative agenda for next session. As we all know, there's been a proposal to amend the education clause in Minnesota's Constitution, and it is expected that the Minnesota legislature will be debating whether or not to submit this or some version of it to the state's voters that would ultimately determine if the Constitution is modified. Education organizations, including some which we are members, like AMSD, SBA, are all debating whether or not to submit this, and they're all deciding on taking a position, whether or not they want to, on this proposed measure, whether we support it or not, or suggest modifications of what is being proposed. I assume that this is a conversation that began some time ago. We've all had an opportunity to hear discussions, speakers about it. We've seen materials about it. We've read opinion pieces from various perspectives, and even possibly been involved in discussions with those proposing the change, and are having discussions with people who have concerns about it. So we're going to begin the discussion tonight to determine whether or not the board is going to take a position on supporting this amendment, the proposed amendment, or not. Based on our discussion here tonight, we will potentially discuss it at future meetings. We'll discuss next steps after we start this discussion tonight. To clarify, we are not planning to take any action on this item tonight. As directors willing to speak tonight begin to enter the queue, I'm going to share my own thoughts and questions about this. First, I want to thank everybody in engaging in this, I think, necessary discussion about education clause in our Constitution. As a longtime public school parent, teacher, and now school board member, the idea of enshrining a quality public education as a constitutional right makes sense to me. Like with other rights, I agree with that approach. However, I do have some concerns about how we go about defining what quality means, how we go about measuring it. So I would like to process that element of the proposal a little further. Equally important to me, especially as a board member constantly having to lobby the legislature for funding to deliver on what they've been legally required to provide, like special education and English language services for English language learners. I absolutely want to see a corresponding constitutional guarantee of the funding necessary to meet this quality standard. At a minimum, this is necessary to meet the quality standard. It's also currently in the Constitution, and I'd like to see if it can remain. Unless it's because we know that we can't provide the funding for a quality education, and that's why we don't want to say that how we're going to fund this. I don't think it's right for us to make promises to our children that we can't keep. So, just some of my thoughts, Director Arneson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it is important that we begin this conversation and allow an opportunity for people to comment on this. This is certainly, as of now, this is on the kind of docket for the upcoming legislative season, and it's important for us to therefore have an opinion, and it'd be best, of course, if we have some time to process and work together as a board on that position. So I appreciated your comments and I agree with your sentiment. I think that this amendment, so the language, and we know that language and the words we use matter, and this proposal, it reinforces this. It's about finding the right words
to emphasize the public responsibility to educate our children and to eliminate racial disparities in education. So there is no doubt in my mind that quality has a different and stronger meaning than adequate or uniform, words in the current Constitution. Using stronger and clearer language to describe the type of education all of our children deserve is definitely something I can get behind, like you said. However, the proposed changes continue beyond that word, and because language and the words we use matter, the additional proposed language is concerning to me for two reasons, the same reasons that you suggested. First, it removes the words, I quote, "The legislature shall make such provisions by taxation otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools throughout the state." And it replaces it with, "It is a paramount duty of the state to ensure quality public schools that fulfill this fundamental right." These two phrases do not say the same thing, which is especially significant in a proposal that is all about emphasizing the importance of language. Specifically, the current language references taxation, an expectation that the state will raise revenue to support public schools. We just certified or pre-certified our tax levy here tonight. And we know from this action and every budget decision that we make that financial resources are absolutely not equal and very dependent on the property wealth of a school's immediate community. This is the consequence of moving away from the philosophy of the Minnesota Miracle and toward property taxes as a major source of funding. The new language says public education is a state, quote, duty, but says nothing about funding obligation. I've listened to Justice Page on an online forum about this omission, and he was asked in this forum why not include the word taxation, and his response was, "It's implied, so it isn't necessary because it's implied." It's my take on this, just as a school board member, like you said, Chair Ellison, who knows how much energy we spend to even get inflation adjustments, and knowing there are some legislators, even in this past session, who argued for all new education investment to go toward private and charter schools exclusively and away from district public schools and Minneapolis public schools specifically. And so for that reason, I'm really concerned about this, and I can't support a proposal that omits the words taxation and instead leaves it to chance that future decision makers will assume that quality has to include financing. And I think it's important that we say that. It also, the second issue that I have is it adds the word quality education as measured against uniform achievement standards set forth by the state. That's how it describes quality education. And the Our Children brochure campaign described the next steps. It says, with the passage of the Page Amendment, the legislature will review and update Minnesota law to create quality public education for all students. With community input, the legislature will redefine policies that align with quality education standard. After the adoption of the amendment and subsequent following policy changes, if further definition is needed, the public may seek redress in the courts, which could then return the issue to the legislature for further review. So again, this is about the importance of language, and I think any adjective can mean different things to different people, particularly on a topic as important as the education of our children, which is our future, and the need to address racial disparities. So I applaud the intentions here. I think it's essentially saying that we shouldn't just have words written down, they should mean something. And I agree with that intention, but I question the wisdom of changing a constitution. A constitution is supposed to be a foundational document to include a mandate for undefined measurements, especially knowing that those measurements are hotly debated in the education world and ever-changing, and that the steps include defining legislation through litigation. And I just do not think litigation is a good way to make policy. So that's what I have to say about that for now, but I'm not in favor of this in its current stance.
Thank you, Director Arneson. Student Representative Deborah Meskel.
Well, I would say on the Page Amendment, I believe that quality education is something that needs to be pushed forward in government. And there are many representatives in the state that don't see public education as important enough to fund and important to invest in. And for many students, public education is the only thing that's available to them. But that also means that simply defining quality education in really loose terms and also not adding in funding, which is, I think, the reason that public education is really struggling right now. It's because of funding. And you see it, you know, in the schools that I've gone into, MPS, the teachers care. The administration cares. Everyone cares. That the reason they're in public schools and not in private schools is because they care. But there isn't the money to allow public school students to, you know, really have a quality education. And I think the Page Amendment should include that, and it should include that funding piece, because that's the reason that public schools are truly struggling right now.
Thank you. Director Caprini.
Excuse me. I just wanted to say thank you to Director Arneson and Chair Ellison, as well as Representative Deborah Meskel for your comments. I have struggled with this amendment for well over a year. And I keep trying to tell myself that the implication of funding, I was trying to find it. And I have asked in the past, several legislators in years past, what is the dollar amount? What does it cost to, for the per pupil dollar amount? And I couldn't get an answer. So if I couldn't get an answer as to what exactly that cost is, I don't believe I'm going to be able to feel comfortable supporting an amendment that doesn't have the funding spelled out within the amendment. So I guess my hope is that they're able to go back to the table and come up with some language that explicitly tells us, how it's going to be funded. And I too believe that children deserve to have a quality education. And there does need to be some changes made with the way that it's written, the amendment is written. So my hope is that they do go back to the table, the drawing board, and just come up with something that's more concrete and doesn't have to be kind of looked for in the details. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Elamine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have mixed feelings, because at the same time I'm thinking about Black and brown children, children that look like me, children that I know that have been pushed through the system when it comes to the educational system. Because I know it does take dollars, I also know that sometimes it's just the will to do, to make sure that our children are being educated in the right way. And far too many of children in my community have not received a quality education. And it should not matter where you are or what zip code you live in regards to the quality of education that you receive. And so for me to, this amendment, again, language does matter, but when I think of things that we did, sometimes our language doesn't explain directly where we're trying to go or what's being done. So for me, this Page Amendment, it brings awareness to the poor education system that has taken place, mostly for us as Black and brown children. When we think about the fact that 4 out of 5 of our children can't read, they don't understand the basic math when it comes to school, but they're consistently being pushed through the system, something has to be done to bring the attention to quality education, the dollars that needs to be placed into the schools that are most impacted, whatever it is that needs to be done. But we can't keep ignoring the situation, I'll put it that way. And I've seen that happen too much. I've seen class of 2019, 17, 18, just continuously get pushed through the system. And it is our children that are failing. And so for me to see the attention, the awareness being brought to this, I think that's why I lean my support to it. And again, we need to fight more at the legislative level. We need to push for more dollars, but at the same time, we need to push for our expectations to be held higher when it comes to the education that our children are receiving. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Caprini.
Thank you, Director Elamine. I honestly, not to speak for my colleagues, I can only imagine that they feel the same way that you do, that believe the same things that you do, maybe not have experienced some of the experiences that you've spoken of children who have been pushed through. I have experienced some of those things. I do believe we're in a much different place than when my children first started at MPS, a much different place, academically, foundationally. But my biggest, and I'm not here to try to change your support, because I appreciate your support for the amendment and I respect it so much. But my biggest concern is if it's not said, if it's not written, then it really doesn't exist. And my biggest fear is that we will continually end up in the same place, constantly in court, and it's almost as if we're, I'm very concerned about the funding piece, because for me, it just gives me it makes my imagination think that public education wouldn't exist. What if they wanted to change public housing and change the language there, and where would the funding come from for that? I mean, I realize that the federal government, I don't believe, funds public housing anymore. Maybe perhaps it comes from the city, but again, language means everything. So I completely agree with you. Our children deserve a quality education, but our children also have a right to have it funded fully so that we are able to provide said quality education. And it's a constant battle, and I just see there's parts of me that believes that this is somewhat kind of a war on public education. And I'm afraid that if we don't have the public institutions for our children to be able to exist in, they'll be in other places where they may not see themselves, and there may be they may end up in going to several different schools because the options outside of public education don't always accept our kids, and sometimes they do, and then they send them right back, and then they come back and there's no funding, and we've got schools that are scrambling around to try to find support for them. So the funding piece, the language, the taxation is incredibly important to me, and I'm hoping that they're able to come to some kind of even medium and have quality and still tell me how that's going to happen, where those dollars are going to come from, because there is no free lunch. Everything costs something, and the last thing I want is for the continuation of our Black and brown children being getting the short end of that cost. So I just I can't support the amendment until they come back and show me something different.
But I think you even said it. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, is it okay for me to respond? You even said it, that when you ask about the per pupil rate, you're not able to get an answer. And I'm just going to say for me that I see that because in different areas, it changes. Northside schools may not need what Southside schools need. So you're going to see that difference, that variance, but the quality of education should not matter where you are. It should not matter what color of your skin or zip code. We should all be entitled to that. And I don't care if it's public school, private school, charter school. For me, it's all across the board. It's all across the board on what should be, when it comes to our children, education, they should be entitled to receive the basic education to be able to step outside and be a productive citizen within our history here.
I don't think we're disagreeing with one another. I really don't. I honestly don't believe we're disagreeing. I'm specifically speaking about how do we continue to move forward to get there. And if we don't have the language saying that the legislature is responsible for making sure that we are going to fund those public institutions, then why do it? Why do it? Big corporations could decide, hey, you know what? Language isn't there, so I'm not going to support them with my tax dollars. You know, neighborhoods could decide. So it just goes on and on and on. There is that in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, you know, and I'm willing to admit I'm wrong if someone tells me I'm wrong. But I feel like that's what I'm believing to be the case, because public education is funded with tax dollars. So, and it's not just from property tax. Well, property taxes, businesses own properties. They're property taxes. So if we eliminate it, then we don't have to pay for it. I can't afford to do it by myself. But I'm done, I promise.
No, I don't think we're disagreeing at all. It's just a difference of opinion. And how we see it and how we get to what we're trying to get to. So again, yeah, I'll leave it there too. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To my understanding about page amendment, I understand that, in my understanding, that this page amendment, it's bringing the attention and accountability at the highest level in the state. It also reminds us, as people of state of Minnesota, it's our responsibility to educate effectively all students of the state of Minnesota, including those people of color. So in other words, I do support this amendment, and I feel it's bringing more attention to the educational disparity between students, white students and students of color. And it's a healthy discussion at the highest level. And it's a discussion that we need to have, and we must have it, because of there is a problem. Over 60% of students of color are not proficient in math and science, and reading and writing. So these are something that we need to have discussion, and I think it serves good purpose. In terms of language, there's always room for discussion. And I do believe that we can access those individuals who are leading this amendment to come forward and have further discussions with us in terms of, opinion, and as the purpose of myself, I want to see that all students perform well academically. I want to see all students get the financial support from the state of Minnesota. This is a constitutional responsibility for our state, our country, to educate all children. And if there is a gap in areas where we want to make sure that this area has to be improved. So we can continue this discussion, but I think as the Minneapolis Public Schools, we are a leader in public education in our state, I believe, and I hope I'm right. We have to face the music, and we have to be part of this, and we have responsibility to stand on this issue. And I'm glad that we are having this discussion, and I hope the discussion continues. And if my fellow board members suggesting, or maybe I am suggesting that we may invite the leaders of this initiative to come and speak in front of the board, and we can have further discussions publicly. Thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Ali. I think I agree with you. As a matter of fact, you and I, with most of the board members on this dais tonight, talked for 2 years almost about how to provide high-quality education for our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students in our Minneapolis public schools, no matter which neighborhood they live in. And so for me, it's not a discussion about whether we need quality education. Well, of course we do, yes. But we also went through a process where we tried to figure out how are we going to fund that quality education within our own district. And I think that needs to be a part of the discussion as well. And then I'm concerned about how we measure. Is that testing again? Director Inns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your leadership on this issue and bringing the discussion forward to the board. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Director Arneson, as well, for your eloquent comments. I appreciate all of the work of my colleagues here and this excellent discussion that we're having. I think it's important for us as board members in Minneapolis Public Schools to speak publicly on this issue and to lead as the elected representatives of the school board in Minneapolis, who will be greatly impacted by, and our students and our community members will be greatly impacted by this amendment. So I think it's important for us to have our voice be heard and for us to take leadership, in fact, and other urban districts as well, I believe, should lead and talk about if, in fact, the goal is to make sure that all our students are succeeding, are achieving, are getting that quality public education. I think it's important for our voices to be heard in this process, as we are the ones that are elected to represent people in those cities where so many of the kids have been failed for so long, right? So I think it's really important. Now, we've been talking about, and the language in the Page Amendment is uniform, measured against uniform achievement standards. So that's how we're going to determine whether or not somebody's getting a quality public education. Is we're going to measure it against uniform achievement standards. We've been talking about that for, I don't know, since I've been in public education. I mean, we had a law, No Child Left Behind. Sounded great, right? No Child Left Behind. Who could argue with that? We had, what was the law in Minnesota? The every student succeeds, or I don't know what, I don't forget. But right, these are all about what was our when I got on the board here, what was our Acceleration 2020 was all about goals, right? It was about numbers, hitting goals, right? And that's, you know, it's one thing to talk about setting goals and wanting students to achieve uniform achievement standards. It's another thing to talk about how we're going to get there, and you know, what is the right way to do that. Anybody can set a goal, right? You know, as a teacher, kids set goals. As a special education teacher, we set goals for our students that have to be quantifiable, right? The nature of those goals are important, though, and just to say that you're going to do something isn't the same as actually doing it. And so I particularly was hit by the comments, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, about funding, as we are perpetually, right, digging in the hole and asking for funding here. I don't want to go over old ground, but I do want to point out one other thing about this that folks haven't really talked about this amendment that I think is significant, is that the Page Amendment was cited in the current segregation lawsuit, and we just dealt in our district. We're trying to deal with integrating our schools, right? And it was cited, the clause, not the Page Amendment, but the clause in the Constitution that it seeks to remove was cited by the Supreme Court, right, as a reason why. So it says in the current language in the Constitution, right, it said that the current segregated school system is not uniform, general, thorough, or efficient, right? And that's why our current system of schools, our segregated system of schools, is unconstitutional, because they're not those things, right? So this opens the ground If we eliminate that language, we're opening the ground, the territory in this state to have segregated schools and say, well, our Constitution is not going to prevent segregated schools anymore. We're going to say it's okay to have segregated schools as long as you have these uniform achievement standards, the uniform achievement standards, or you're shooting for those uniform achievement standards even, right? So for me, that's the most troubling thing. You don't even, the way I read it, you don't even need to have a school anymore. You just have to have uniform achievement standards, right? And in fact, in the Senate, I think last session, at the very end of the session, one of the senators there, they added to the Page Amendment that they were going to support homeschooling was going to be considered good for funding, or school vouchers. Anybody could be a school as long as they provide these uniform achievement standards. So all the other things that we think are important in schools, right, are out the window. And all we have to do is achieve these these that aren't even defined, right? So for me, I don't know. I mean, it's great. I believe that kids should have a right to a quality education. I mean, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm a teacher. That's why I mean, that's the reason for my life, practically, and who wouldn't support that? But for all the reasons way more articulate reasons that my colleagues have pointed out, and in addition to this concern over school segregation, I don't see how we should support this. I think it's going to be detrimental to the kids. Certainly, it's going to be detrimental to our school district. So thanks for indulging me, and I'm sorry I wasn't more articulate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to keep adding and going on and on in this conversation, I also have very mixed feelings, and not being from Minnesota, I feel like so many times that Minnesotans don't want to face. But yeah, the lack of funding, just specifically when it comes to our district, where is the money? We can change the language, we can put all this beautiful wording, but $67 million that our district just alone, it's not funded for special education and ELL education. But I wanted, I don't know if this will be appropriate to ask Council more the importance of the implication of the phrase paramount duty in the legal precedents. I mean, I don't know, perhaps maybe not tonight, but that could be, I would like to have her opinion in this, if that is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for this discussion tonight. I think, Superintendent, the only request there was is have General Counsel more define on that one phrase from the proposed amendment. We will be talking about this again as we develop a legislative agenda, if this comes before the legislature, state legislature, in the next session. So thank you, everybody, for this discussion. Our final item tonight is for directors to give a brief update on any committee that they chair, any school district work, education-related work that they're working on, been doing. Press the request to speak button, and I will call down. I will only call your name if you show up on the queue. Director Caprini.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. The Finance Committee meeting will be meeting next Tuesday, September 21st at 5 o'clock, and it will be in person. So I'm very excited about that. All right, thank you.
Director Jordan.
Hi, thank you, Chair Ellison. I'll be quick. Just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Palmer and her staff at Washburn. Had an excellent open house, as well as at Justice Page. I would like to remind people to please wear a mask when they're in MPS buildings, as I made the mistake of not wearing a mask one day. But all kidding aside, though, thank you. I wanted to say really quickly to parents, please fill out the free and reduced lunch form. I know it's called something else this year, but please fill it out. That's how we get.
Application for educational benefits.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't remember what it was, but thank you. Yes, so please fill that out. It is essential for funding our services that we provide to all our students. And once again, thank you to parents for being understanding on our busing situation. That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. Next policy committee meeting will be Tuesday, September 28th for committee of the whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Arneson. Oops.
I just draw your attention, Director Elamine and I are on represent our board on the youth coordinating board, and we have recently passed a youth master plan. And for anyone in the public or our colleagues, if you'd like to review it, it is posted today on today's agenda. Thank you.
NRP, we will actually be meeting on the 28th of this month as well. Not back in person yet, still virtual due to the Delta, but we are meeting. Thank you.
Okay, Director Surya.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking of legislative issues, we're supposed to complete the survey for the Association of Metropolitan School Districts pretty soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I got a couple of things, and they're on a couple different phones, so I'm going to try and cover it all. First of all, I want to let people know that on Saturday, September 25th, Indian Ed Department is holding their Honoring Our Youth Back to School powwow. Everybody is welcome to this free outdoor event. It's at North High School Athletics Field. It says 1801 Freeman Avenue, but you enter on Girard, so I'm really confused about the address there. But anyway, use the south entrance when entering the athletics field. So that's exciting. A couple other things I've been doing. Welcome back to school. I went to school on the first day of one of our schools that holds two of our schools, one of our buildings that holds two of our schools, and just to see the smiles on children's faces and the staff faces. So excited to be back in a building. Hope it lasts, continues safely. I attended last week's Special Education Advisory Committee meeting where parents heard about the new special education structure. The staff who were there were really on it. And so thank you everybody for attending. It was great information. I just want to let people know that I've sent emails to city and county leaders about an encampment that is affecting some of our students being able to get safely to and from school, and then even during school. The memorandum of agreement that we have with the Native community is finalizing the writing this week. It's going to be presented to MUD for approval, and it's going to come to us at our November meeting. We're going to vote on it in December. I was under the Friday night lights at the new North Polars Hobbs Field and watched North High play Fridley. They lost, but they looked really good. And apparently last year they didn't score. North High didn't score against Fridley. And so this year we scored. We were ahead or tied for most of the game, lost in the last couple of minutes. So I'm looking forward to seeing much more W's this season. Tomorrow is the beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month, and so I'm hoping, Superintendent, that we are planning ways to celebrate our Latino students, families, and staff. But looking forward to that month. I wanted to say that the weekly Council of Great City School calls continue, and I've been on those calls every week. And we're discussing things like best learning practices, both at distance and in person. And I was fortunate to be able to hear other districts and how they were, how returning to school buildings was going before we actually opened our doors, and that was beneficial. But at the end of one of the meetings, the chair of the committee asked us to talk about what we were doing for ourselves, how we were feeding, healing, serving ourselves in this pandemic and going back to school, serving students. And I was really touched by that. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. And so I want to just remind all of us that we take care of ourselves. It's important to stay healthy as we consider what we do for students. So thank you. That is the end of our meeting. Let me make sure I've got no hands raised. Okay.
The We Win Institute, the graduation, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that. The Black Male Achievement, working with Michael Walker, and that graduation was just, it was phenomenal to be able to have it here. The decoration, everything was set up so beautiful. So to see the staff, the teachers of color that came together to make this happen, to hear the students' story on how it really made an impact it was phenomenal. So I do apologize, but wanted to bring that up as well.
No, thank you for that. I wanted to be able to attend that, so I'm glad to hear that it went so well. Seeing no other hands, Director Arneson, can I please get a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn has been moved and seconded. Clerk Polly, can you please call the roll on the motion to adjourn?
Arneson.
Aye.
Elamine.
Yes.
Ali.
Yes.
Surrio. Inns.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Caprini.
Aye.
Polly is yes. Chair Ellison.
Yes, thank you. That motion carries. We are adjourned. Our next meeting is a committee of the whole on September 28th. Members of public, if you want to attend, you need to sign up for that beforehand. Visit our website to register. I see people are leaving. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
It's like old times.
Almost.